Hey guys, tonight we're going to step back in time, to a world lit only by fire and the moon. A world where the horizon isn't interrupted by skyscrapers, but by the deep dark woods that seem to stretch on forever. Imagine you're there now, not in a castle or on a mighty steed, but in a small, humble cottage. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, damp earth, and something vaguely like wet dog. Outside, there's no hum of traffic, only the whisper of wind through thatch, and the distant, lonely call of an owl. This is your new home, and as you take your first breath of its thick medieval air, you should know that you probably won't survive this. In fact, you're statistically unlikely to see your 30th birthday. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is, so drop a comment below and say hello. It's always amazing to see how this little corner of the internet spans the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you register isn't a sight, but a sudden, shocking cold. One moment you're floating in a warm, muffled darkness. The next, you're pulled into a world of sharp angles and rough surfaces. The air that rushes into your lungs for the first time feels like swallowing ice. It burns. Instinct takes over and you scream. A thin, reedy wail that cuts through the low murmurs in the small, smoky room. Your eyes, still adjusting, can only make out shifting shapes in the flickering firelight. Silhouettes lean over you, their faces obscured by shadow. This is it. This is your grand entrance. There's no sterile delivery room, no beeping machinery, no doctor in blue scrubs. Your arrival happens on a straw-stuffed mattress laid on the dirt floor of a one-room wattle and daub hut. Your mother, exhausted and pale, has just endured hours of labour with only the village midwife to help. The midwife herself is a woman whose hands are more familiar with gutting a rabbit than with sterile procedure. The only pain relief on offer for your mother was a wad of cloth to bite down on, and perhaps a prayer to St. Margaret, the patron saint of childbirth. The hands that now hold you are chapped and calloused. The midwife, a woman named Elspeth, examines you with a practiced, if not particularly gentle eye. She checks for the basics: 10 fingers, 10 toes, a lusty cry. She might even hold you upside down for a moment and give you a smart slap on the behind, a traditional, if startling, method to ensure your lungs are working properly. Your first paediatric checkup is less a medical examination and more a quick once-over that modern medicine would probably call an assault. A major point of relief for everyone is that you've been born alive and without any obvious major defects. A significant number of babies in this era are stillborn, and the moment of birth is fraught with peril for both you and your mother. But you've cleared the first, most immediate, hurdle. Congratulations. Now the real challenges begin. The midwife takes a knife, the same one she might have used to slice bread this morning, and cuts the umbilical cord. She doesn't swab it with alcohol. She might tie it off with a simple piece of thread and perhaps apply a poultice of herbs and, unfortunately, something like cow dung, which was thought to have healing properties. The risk of tetanus or a nasty infection starting in your navel is immediately terrifyingly high. You're then handed off to be cleaned, but this isn't a warm, bubbly bath. You're wiped down with a rough linen cloth and water that was hauled from the village well earlier in the day. It's lukewarm at best, and its cleanliness is questionable. Then comes the swaddling. You're wrapped tightly, from your neck to your toes, in strips of cloth. The idea is to keep you warm and to ensure your limbs grow straight, a belief that dates back to antiquity. While well-intentioned, if the swaddling is too tight, it can restrict your breathing and circulation. Your welcome party is a humble affair. It consists of your tired but relieved mother, your anxious father peering in from the edge of the room, and maybe a stray chicken that has wandered in to see what all the fuss is about. There are no balloons, no cake, just a profound sense of having survived. Historians still argue whether the local midwife was seen as a pillar of the community or a convenient scapegoat, when things, as they so often did, went wrong. If you had been born with a disability, or if your mother had died, Elspeth's reputation, and perhaps her safety, could be in jeopardy. Accusations of witchcraft often started with whispers in the wake of a difficult birth. Luckily for you and for Elspeth, you seem healthy. A quirky little tidbit from the time is the fascination with a baby born with a caul, a harmless piece of the amniotic membrane still covering the head. This was seen as a powerful omen of good fortune, a sign that the child was destined for greatness and would be protected from drowning. You, however, are born without one. No special destiny for you, just the standard issue medieval life experience. You'll have to make your own luck. As you're finally placed in your mother's arms, the initial shock of life begins to subside into a hazy discomfort. You're cold, you're damp, and you're hungry. The world you've entered is not designed for your comfort or your survival. In fact, about 1 in every 4 babies born in this era won't live to see their first birthday. The odds are not in your favour. Every moment from this point forward is a gamble. Your first breath was a victory. Your first cry was a triumph. But as you lie there, swaddled tightly in the dim, smoky light of your new home, you are utterly vulnerable, facing a world that has 1,000 tiny, mundane ways to kill you before you even learn to walk. Your first meal is a frantic, fumbling affair. You root around, guided by instinct, until you find your mother's breast. The first milk you receive, the colostrum, is a thick, yellowish substance packed with antibodies. Your ancestors didn't know the word antibody, of course, but they knew this. First milk was liquid gold, crucial for giving a newborn a fighting chance. It's your first and best line of defence in a world teeming with invisible enemies. For the next few months, your life settles into a simple, fragile rhythm. Sleep, cry, eat, repeat. Your world is the small, dark cottage, the scratchy feel of your woolen blanket, and the constant, comforting scent of your mother. But what if your mother couldn't feed you? Perhaps she's too ill after the birth, or tragically, she doesn't survive it. In that case, your family faces a difficult choice. Your father might try to feed you animal milk, goats or cows, from a horn or a rudimentary cup. This is incredibly risky. The milk isn't pasteurized, it's often dirty, and your tiny developing digestive system can't handle it well. It will likely lead to a fatal case of diarrhea, known grimly as the flux. The more common solution, especially for a family with a bit of standing, is to hire a wet nurse. This was a widespread and vital occupation. But finding a good wet nurse is a gamble. You're essentially handed over to a stranger, whose own health and habits now directly determine your survival. Is she clean? Is her milk plentiful? Does she have her own child to feed, and will she favour them over you? Worst of all, she could pass on diseases to you, and you to her. Your life is now subcontracted out, and you're entirely at the mercy of this new caregiver. It's the medieval version of a background check, only the stakes are infinitely higher. Let's assume you're one of the lucky ones, and your mother is healthy enough to feed you herself. You're growing, putting on a bit of fat, and starting to look less like a wrinkled plum and more like a proper baby. But as the months tick by, new threats emerge. These are the monsters we've caged with vaccines, but in your world they roam free. A visitor to your cottage, a cousin from a nearby village, comes bearing a gift, and also the measles. To us it's a rash and a few days off school. To you, it's a raging fever, a hacking cough that feels like your lungs are tearing, and eyes so sensitive to light that your mother has to hang a cloth over your cradle. There is no Tylenol to bring the fever down, no cough syrup to soothe your throat. There are only prayers and herbal infusions that do little more than hydrate you, if you can even keep them down. Or perhaps it's the chin cough, what we call whooping cough. You are seized by violent, uncontrollable coughing fits that leave you gasping for air, your face turning a terrifying shade of blue. Each gasp for breath makes a horrifying whooping sound. Your parents can do nothing but hold you, watching helplessly as you struggle for every single breath. These diseases, which we consider routine childhood illnesses, are now epic battles for your life. A simple fever isn't just a number on a thermometer, because thermometers don't exist. It's a terrifying condition judged only by the heat radiating from your skin and the delirium in your eyes. Today we panic if a baby's temperature hits 102. Back then, a life-threatening fever was just another Tuesday. Then comes teething. The constant gnawing pain in your gums makes you miserable. You cry incessantly, you drool, you refuse to eat. Your mother, desperate for a solution, might rub your gums with honey, a potential source of infant botulism, or give you a piece of hard bread to chew on. For a touch of magical protection, a quirky but common remedy was to hang a piece of polished coral on a string around your neck. It was thought to soothe the gums and ward off evil spirits drawn to a crying child. It's your first piece of jewellery, and it's meant to be a life-saving amulet. It's also, let's be honest, a colossal choking hazard. All this suffering raises a difficult question, one that historians still debate. Faced with such staggering infant mortality rates, did parents emotionally distance themselves from their babies as a form of self-preservation? It's tempting to think so. Why invest so much love in a tiny creature who has a 1 in 4 chance of not making it to their first birthday? And yet, the evidence we have, from lullabies to prayers to the heartbreaking inscriptions on tiny graves, suggests that the love of a parent was just as fierce and the grief just as profound as it is today. The human heart doesn't change that much. What changes is the context, the constant crushing anxiety that lurks beneath every coo and every smile. The greatest killer of all during this first year isn't a dramatic named disease. It's something far more mundane: dehydration from dysentery. A bout of diarrhea caused by contaminated water from the well, or a fly landing on your food, is a death sentence. Your body loses fluids faster than you can take them in. You become listless, your eyes sink, your skin loses its elasticity. You remember that cow dung poultice they put on your navel at birth? The bacteria from that could be paying you a visit right now internally. Your parents would be frantic trying to get you to drink water, weak herbal teas, or thin gruel. But in a world without IV drips or electrolyte solutions, there is very little they can do as you simply fade away. But you are a fighter. You survive a lung infection in the winter. You overcome a terrifying bout of the flux in the summer. You've made it through your first year. A small celebration might be in order. Perhaps your father carves you a small wooden toy. Your mother might say an extra prayer of thanks. You have beaten the odds. You're no longer an infant. You are a toddler. You have survived the most dangerous year of your life. The problem is, the world is about to get a whole lot bigger, and with it, a whole new set of dangers. You've done it. You've celebrated your first birthday, a milestone that a quarter of your peers never reached. You're now entering the glorious phase of toddlerhood. You've learned to crawl, and soon you'll be taking your first wobbly, uncertain steps. Your world expands from the confines of your cradle to the entire single room of the cottage, and then beyond that to the threshold of the front door. The world is your oyster, and you're ready to explore. Unfortunately, this oyster is filled with grit, grime, and a shocking number of ways to get hurt. Your home, a cosy haven in your infancy, is now a minefield of potential hazards. The central feature of the room is the open hearth in the middle of the floor. There's no fireplace screen, no protective grate. It's just a pit of glowing embers and open flame used for cooking, heating, and light. It's mesmerizing. The dancing flames are the most interesting thing you've ever seen. You crawl towards it, drawn by the light and warmth, your mother's sharp cry of no, barely, registering. A single moment of inattention is all it takes for you to topple into the ash, receiving a burn that will scar you for life, if it doesn't become infected and kill you first. Remember how dangerous a tiny splinter could be? Imagine a severe burn on your delicate toddler skin. The floor itself is your playground. It's made of packed earth, which is a polite way of saying dirt. It's uneven, perpetually damp, and shared with everyone. Chickens peck their way in and out. The family dog, fleas and all, naps by the fire. Mice skitter in the thatch. Anything that gets dropped on the floor, a bit of food, a wood shaving, a rusty nail that fell from a beam, is fair game for your curious hands and inevitably your mouth. The concept of a 5-second rule doesn't exist, because the floor is never clean to begin with. Every object you put in your mouth is a gamble with parasites, bacteria and disease. That interesting looking pebble? It might have been licked by the dog moments before. That stray bit of straw? It might have been part of the bedding where your father recently butchered a pig. Let's say you managed to avoid the fire and the more disgusting floor finds. You've now mastered walking. The world is your racetrack. You toddle around the cottage, a tiny, unstoppable force of chaos. You pull things off the simple wooden table. You investigate the bucket of yesterday's washing water. You try to climb the rickety stool. Your parents, who are also trying to spin wool, mend tools, or cook a meal, can't possibly watch you every second. There are no playpens, no baby gates. Childproofing is not a concept. The world is as it is, and it's up to you to learn its sharp edges, often the hard way. But the real dangers lie just outside the door. The moment you stumble out into the sunlight, the risk factor increases tenfold. Your family lives in a small village, a tight cluster of houses surrounded by fields. The village green, the central open space, is a communal work area. There's no soft green lawn for you to play on. Instead, it's a muddy yard full of fascinating new dangers. The blacksmith's forge sends sparks flying. The tanner is scraping hides with sharp tools and using vats of foul-smelling liquids, including urine, to cure the leather. You wouldn't want to fall in there. Farm animals wander freely. A sow, protective of her piglets, could knock you over and give you a nasty bite. A bad-tempered goose, which is to say most geese, can be surprisingly aggressive. And then there are the horses and oxen used for ploughing. These are huge, powerful animals, and you're a tiny, unpredictable object at their feet. A single kick, not even meant maliciously, could be instantly fatal. Your parents' warnings to stay away are just words, but the sheer size of a draft horse is a lesson you'll hopefully learn from a safe distance. One of the greatest and most insidious dangers is the village well or the local pond. To you, it's a wonderful, splashy thing. You're drawn to the glimmer of the water, but wells are open, deep holes in the ground with low stone walls. If they have walls at all, ponds have slippery, muddy banks. Drowning was a shockingly common cause of death for medieval toddlers. A moment of distraction, a single slip, and you could be in the water. By the time anyone notices you're gone, it's far too late. There's a quirky but sad tidbit of medieval law that reflects this reality. Coroners' rolls from the period are filled with accidental deaths of children, and a recurring verdict is death by misadventure. But the law also had to grapple with the question of responsibility. Historians still argue whether the perceived negligence of parents was a punishable offence, or simply an accepted tragic part of life. Often, a parent's own grief was seen as punishment enough. The simple fact is, in a world where every member of the family had to work constantly just to survive, a modern level of supervision was impossible. Your parents love you, but they also have to milk the cow, weed the garden, and bake the bread, or the whole family starves. Let's not forget the fun you can have with what you find. You might see some colourful berries on a bush at the edge of the woods. They look delicious, a bit like the raspberries your mother sometimes gathers. Unfortunately, these are the berries of deadly nightshade. A handful is enough to cause hallucinations, paralysis, and death. Your world has no warning labels. Every plant, every mushroom, every source of water is a matter of trial and error, and the error can be your last. Somehow you navigate this gauntlet. You learn not to touch the fire, you learn to give the grumpy gander a wide berth, you're pulled away from the edge of the well just in time. You've survived your toddler years, accumulating a collection of bumps, bruises, and maybe a small scar or two. You're becoming resilient. You're learning the rules of your world. But as you grow out of toddlerhood and into childhood, the dangers don't disappear. They just change their shape. The world is about to ask more of you than just survival. It's about to ask you to work. You've survived the treacherous landscape of toddlerhood and are now a sturdy child of 5 or 6. The immediate moment-to-moment dangers of falling into the fire or a well have lessened slightly, not because the world is safer, but because you've learned a bit of caution. Your days of aimless wandering are over. Now a new and more insidious threat takes centre stage, one that will follow you for the rest of your life, the unreliability of your food. What you eat or don't eat will define your health, your strength, and your chances of seeing another decade. Your diet is, to put it mildly, monotonous. Forget the lavish, multi-course banquets you see in movies. That's for the 1%, the nobility. You're part of the vast majority and your world runs on bread, and more bread. But this isn't the soft, enriched, sliced loaf you might be thinking of. Your daily bread is a heavy, dense and chewy affair made from whatever grains your family could grow or afford. If you're lucky, it's made from wheat. More likely it's rye, barley or oats. It's coarse, dark, and so tough that you might have to soak it in your soup or ale to make it chewable. This bread, called maslin when it was a mix of wheat and rye, is the staple. It's the core of every meal. Your breakfast is a chunk of this bread, maybe with a smear of butter if the cow is feeling generous. Lunch, eaten in the fields, is another chunk of bread, perhaps with a bit of hard, cheese and an onion. Your evening meal is the main event, a thick stew, or pottage, bubbling away over the hearth all day. Its contents depend entirely on the season and your family's luck. it's mostly vegetables from your small garden plot. Cabbage, leeks, turnips, peas, maybe a bit of bacon fat for flavour. If you're fortunate, a chicken that has stopped laying might be thrown in, providing a rare taste of meat. You eat this pottage with, you guessed it, a thick slab of bread used as a spoon, which you then eat. It's an edible utensil. Not a bad invention, really. The problem isn't just the monotony, it's the constant gnawing threat of malnutrition. Your diet is heavy on carbohydrates, but desperately lacking in essential vitamins and minerals. Fresh fruit is a rare, seasonal treat. Apples in the fall, berries in the summer. Green vegetables are available, but they don't know about vitamin C. So the spectre of scurvy, with its bleeding gums and aching joints, is a constant companion, especially in the winter months. A lack of iron leads to anemia, leaving you perpetually tired and weak. A childhood without enough protein and calcium means your bones won't grow properly, leaving you stunted and frail for the rest of your life. You are what you eat, and what you're eating is barely enough to keep you going. Then there are the times when the food itself becomes the enemy. Your family stores its grain in a shed or a corner of the cottage. It's a constant battle against dampness, rats, and mould. One of the most terrifying dangers is a fungus called ergot, which can grow on rye in damp seasons. When this infected rye is milled into flour and baked into your daily bread, it unleashes a horrific condition known as St. Anthony's fire. The symptoms are nightmarish. You might experience intense burning pains in your limbs, a sensation so severe it feels like you're being roasted alive. In other cases, it attacks the central nervous system, causing vivid hallucinations, convulsions, and psychosis. Entire villages could be afflicted at once, leading to what seem like outbreaks of mass madness. Historians still argue about whether ergotism could explain some historical accounts of dancing plagues or demonic possessions. For you, it's just the bread you ate this morning trying to kill you. Food safety is a completely alien concept. The meat you do get is a special treat, but it's also a game of Russian roulette. The pig your father slaughters in the fall has to last the whole winter. It's preserved by salting or smoking, but these methods aren't foolproof. A bit of spoiled pork could give you a case of trichinosis or another nasty parasitic infection. The fish from the local river might be contaminated with whatever diseases are festering upstream. Even the water you drink drawn from the village well is a constant risk, shared by both humans and animals. A single sick traveller passing through and using the well could infect the entire community. There's a quirky fringe tidbit about medieval diets that involves the church. The church mandated numerous fast days throughout the year, every Friday, all of Lent and various other saints' days. On these days, you couldn't eat meat or animal products like milk and cheese. This sounds like a health kick, but in reality, it put even more strain on your already limited diet. People got creative though. Since the definition of fish was rather loose, beavers were sometimes classified as fish because they lived in water and had a scaly tail. So, on a Friday, you might be enjoying a nice, holy, church-approved beaver tail for dinner. Puffin was also on the menu for the same reason. It's a classic case of finding a loophole in the divine rules. You are constantly hungry. Not just I could go for a snack hungry, but a deep cellular hunger. Your body craves nutrients it simply cannot get. This chronic malnutrition has a devastating effect on your immune system. Remember those childhood diseases like measles? A well-nourished child might fight it off. A malnourished child like you is far more likely to succumb to complications like pneumonia or bronchitis. Every illness is magnified, every injury takes longer to heal. The daily grind of finding enough calories to survive leaves you vulnerable to every other threat this world can throw at you. Your life is a delicate balance, and it only takes a few missed meals or one bad loaf of bread to tip the scales irrevocably toward death. Having survived the perils of your diet, you're now a child of about 8 or 9, fully integrated into the rhythms of village life. You've learned what you can and cannot eat. You know how to avoid an angry goose, and you're strong enough to be a useful member of the household. But now you become aware of a constant, pervasive feature of your world that you had previously taken for granted, the overwhelming filth. You are living in a world that is, by our standards, unimaginably dirty, and this lack of sanitation is an open invitation for disease to become your constant, unwelcome neighbour. Let's start with you, personally. The idea of a daily shower is a fantasy from another universe. Water is a precious resource that has to be hauled by hand from the well or river, and heating it requires burning precious firewood. Baths are, at best, a weekly or even monthly affair, and often the whole family would use the same tub of water one after another. Your father would go first, then any other men, then your mother, and finally you, the child. By the time it's your turn, the water is a murky, lukewarm soup. The phrase, "don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," comes from this very practice. It's a joke rooted in the grim reality of how filthy the water could get. For daily hygiene, you might manage a splash of cold water on your face and hands in the morning. Soap exists, but it's a harsh, lye-based substance made from animal fat and ash. It's mostly used for laundry, not for personal washing, as it would strip your skin raw. You don't have a toothbrush, so you might rub your teeth with a rough linen cloth or chew on a twig to clean them. As for deodorant, well, that's what a robust natural musk is for. Everyone smells. The scent of stale sweat, unwashed bodies, and wood smoke is the default human perfume. You get used to it. Now, let's zoom out to your house. We've established that the floor is dirt, and you share your living space with animals. But where does everyone, go? There's no indoor plumbing. At night you might use a chamber pot, a simple ceramic or wooden bucket kept under the bed. In the morning, you don't flush it. You simply open the front door and toss the contents into the street. It's a practice so common that people walking in towns would shout "Gardez l'eau," French for "watch out for the water," before emptying their pot from a second-story window. It's the origin of the phrase "Gardez l'eau," and a good reason to walk very carefully down the middle of the road. Your village street isn't a paved road, it's a muddy track, and it serves as the communal sewer and garbage dump. Into this street goes everything: human waste from chamber pots, animal droppings, rotten food scraps, straw from the floors, and the blood and offal from butchered animals. It all mixes together into a thick, foul-smelling sludge that coats the lanes of your town. When it rains, this slurry turns into a stinking river. When it's dry, it turns to dust, and the wind helpfully blows the dried, aerosolized filth everywhere, into your eyes, your lungs, and onto your food. This environment is a paradise for pests. Rats, their bellies full of garbage, grow fat and bold. They infest homes, grain stores, and businesses, carrying with them the fleas that are the vectors for catastrophic diseases. Flies are a constant, buzzing torment, moving indiscriminately from a pile of dung to the chunk of cheese on your table. Every bite of food you take has likely been visited by a fly that was, moments before, feasting on something truly unsanitary. You're living inside a giant petri dish, and the experiment is seeing how long you can last before a pathogen finds its way into your system. A mainstream historical fact is that even castles, the homes of the rich and powerful, were notoriously filthy. Their toilets, called garderobes, were often just small rooms with a hole in the floor that opened to the outside, emptying down the castle wall and into the moat below. The moat, which we imagine as a clean water defence, was often little more than a giant open-air septic tank. The stench in and around a great castle on a hot day would have been breathtakingly awful. Historians still argue about the medieval person's perception of all this filth. Did they simply have a higher tolerance for it? Or were they unhappily resigned to a problem they had no means to solve? While they didn't understand germ theory, they certainly made the connection between bad smells, what they called miasma, and disease. They believed that foul air could carry sickness, which wasn't entirely wrong, even if their reasoning was. People would carry pomanders, small metal balls filled with fragrant herbs and spices, to hold to their noses in smelly areas, a desperate attempt to ward off the noxious, disease-carrying air. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some towns did try to implement basic sanitation rules. In London in the 14th century, regulations were passed forbidding people from throwing their waste into the streets and mandating that it be carried to designated dumps or to the River Thames. These rules were, however, almost impossible to enforce and were widely ignored. There were even officials called rakers, whose job it was to cart away the filth, but it was an endless, thankless task. The sheer volume of waste produced by a concentrated population was simply overwhelming. So you walk through this world every day, you breathe its air, you drink its water, you eat its food. The lack of hygiene isn't just an aesthetic problem, it's a direct assault on your immune system. Every day you're exposed to a menagerie of bacteria and parasites: cholera, typhoid, dysentery, salmonella. Your body is in a constant low-level war against infection. This chronic battle saps your strength and L. Despite your best efforts to navigate a world of questionable food and pervasive filth, it was bound to happen. One morning you wake up feeling wrong. A fiery heat spreads through your body. Your head throbs with a dull, insistent pain, and a cough rattles in your chest. You've gotten sick. In the 21st century, this might mean a day off school, some chicken soup, and a trip to the doctor for antibiotics if it gets serious. In your world, getting sick is like being summoned to a duel with an invisible opponent, and your only available second is a doctor whose methods are based on a 1,500-year-old misunderstanding of the human body. Your parents watch you for a day or two, their faces etched with worry. They try the simple home remedies first. Your mother makes you a hot drink of herbal tea, perhaps with horehound for your cough, or meadow sweet, which contains a chemical similar to aspirin for your fever. She says prayers and might hang a pouch of foul-smelling herbs around your neck to ward off the evil spirits or bad air she believes caused the illness. When you don't get any better, when your fever climbs higher and your breathing becomes ragged, they know they need help. They have two options: the local cunning woman or the university-trained physician. The cunning woman, or village healer, is the most likely choice. She's the same person who might have attended your birth, a woman like Elspeth. Her knowledge is a mix of practical herbalism, folklore, and superstition. She'll examine you, not by taking your temperature, but by looking at the colour of your tongue, the clarity of your eyes, and most importantly the quality of your urine. A popular diagnostic tool was the urine chart, a wheel that matched the colour, consistency, and even the taste of urine to specific ailments. Your mother would have collected your sample in a flask, and the healer would hold it up to the light, swirling it around like a wine connoisseur, making a diagnosis based on its hue. Her treatment will be a blend of the sensible and the bizarre. She might prescribe a poultice of mustard to be placed on your chest to break up the congestion, a remedy that can actually provide some relief. But she might also recommend a quirky treatment like tying the lungs of a fox to your feet, or having you drink a concoction made from boiled earthworms and parsley. The line between medicine and magic is blurry, if it exists at all. If your family has money or connections, or if you live in a larger town, they might summon a physician. This man is a different breed entirely. He's educated, he can read Latin, and his entire medical philosophy is based on the theory of the four humours, an idea inherited from the ancient Greeks, particularly Hippocrates and Galen. This theory holds that the body contains four essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Perfect health is a perfect balance of these four humours. Sickness is caused by an imbalance, too much or too little of one. Therefore, the cure is to rebalance them. The physician's approach is systematic, but systematically wrong. He'll ask about your diet, your activities, and your astrological sign, as the planets were believed to influence the humours. After studying your urine flask, he will declare that you have, for instance, a surplus of blood, which is making you hot and feverish. The logical cure? To remove the excess blood. This is where the leeches come in. The physician, or more likely a barber surgeon he directs, will place several slimy, wriggling leeches on your chest or back. You lie there, weak with fever, as the creatures latch on and begin to drink your blood, the very substance your body needs to fight the infection. If leeches aren't enough, he may opt for direct bloodletting or phlebotomy. The barber surgeon will take out a sharp knife called a lancet, make an incision in a vein in your arm, and drain a prescribed amount of your blood into a bowl. The amount was often shockingly large. You were already weak, and now you're being deliberately weakened further. A major historical fact is that this humoral theory dominated Western medicine for over 1,500 years. It wasn't a fringe idea. It was the absolute bedrock of all medical training at prestigious universities like Salerno, Montpellier, and Paris. A doctor who rejected humoral theory would be like a modern physicist who rejects gravity. If bloodletting doesn't work, other treatments might be tried to target other humours. To get rid of excess phlegm, you might be given an emetic to make you vomit violently. To purge excess bile, you'd be given powerful laxatives. The goal is to get the sickness out of you, in the most literal and unpleasant ways imaginable. You're being bled, purged, and starved, all in the name of a cure. It's a miracle anyone survived the treatment, let alone the original disease. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of medieval medicine. Was it all just harmful nonsense, or were there elements of genuine care that offered psychological comfort, if not a physical cure? The very act of being cared for, of having someone attend to you with authority and concern, can have a powerful placebo effect. Perhaps the physician's calm demeanour and the healer's soothing words did more good than their foul-tasting potions. As you lie there in your fever dream, you are caught between the disease ravaging you from the inside and the cure assaulting you from the outside. Your body is the battlefield. The physician is confident his methods are sound. They are based on centuries of scholarly tradition. The village healer is certain her ancestral remedies hold the key. Your parents are desperate, willing to try anything. And you? You're a 10-year-old child, weak and frightened, hoping that one of these well-intentioned but misguided efforts doesn't accidentally kill you before the illness gets its chance. Miraculously, you pull through. Whether it was because of the herbal teas, in spite of the bloodletting, or simply due to the raw resilience of your own young body, the fever breaks. The rattling in your chest subsides, and the world slowly swims back into focus. You're weak, thinner, and left with a lingering cough, but you're alive. You faced down a serious illness and won. This victory might make you feel invincible, but the truth is, you've just been reminded of how fragile life is, and you're about to learn that in this world, it isn't always the great dramatic sicknesses that get you. Sometimes, the deadliest threat comes from the smallest of things: a splinter, a cut, a single scratch. Your life is filled with rough surfaces and sharp objects. Your family's cottage is made of wood, and the furniture, the simple table, the stools, the wooden spoons you eat with, is hand-carved and unsanded. One evening, while eating your pottage, you get a tiny splinter in your finger from your spoon. It's annoying, a small sharp sting. You try to pull it out with your teeth, but a tiny piece breaks off and remains lodged deep in your skin. You complain to your mother, who inspects it, shrugs, and tells you it will work its way out. There are no fine-point tweezers, no rubbing alcohol, no antiseptic wipes. The incident is forgotten by the next morning. A couple of days later, your finger starts to throb. The area around the tiny wound is red, swollen, and hot to the touch. You've ignored it, but bacteria, Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, and others that live harmlessly on your skin have been given an entry point. They have slipped past your body's first line of defense and are now multiplying rapidly in the warm, welcoming environment of your flesh. This is cellulitis, a common skin infection that today is easily treated with a course of antibiotics. For you, it's the beginning of a potentially fatal cascade. The pain gets worse. It's no longer just a throb, it's a searing, constant ache. A thin red line starts to snake its way up your arm from the site of the infection. This is lymphangitis, a visible sign that the infection is no longer localized. It has entered your lymphatic system, the body's drainage network, and is now travelling towards the core of your body. Your parents see this red streak and their faces pale. This is a sign they recognise and fear. The poison is spreading. Soon, the symptoms of the original illness return, but this time with a vengeance. You're hit with a high fever, chills that shake your entire body, and a drenching sweat. The infection has gone systemic. It has entered your bloodstream, a condition we now call sepsis. The bacteria are raging through your body, and your immune system, which fought so hard against your lung infection, is now overwhelmed. It launches a massive, desperate counterattack, releasing chemicals that cause widespread inflammation. This inflammatory response, designed to save you, is now what's killing you. Your blood vessels become leaky, your blood pressure plummets, and your organs begin to fail. Your family is frantic. The village healer is summoned again. She might apply a poultice of bread mould, a remedy that occasionally worked, though they didn't know why. A specific strain, penicillium, produces the antibiotic we know and love, so this was a literal shot in the dark that could, in rare cases, be miraculously effective. This is a well-known historical fact. The use of mouldy bread as a folk remedy for wounds is documented across many cultures, but it was a lottery. Most bread mould is just useless, or even harmful green fuzz. She might also try a poultice of onions and garlic, which have mild antiseptic properties, or one made of less helpful things like that old favourite cow dung. If a physician or barber surgeon is called, their response will be drastic. Seeing the spreading infection and your failing health, they will identify the source, your hand, as the root of the problem. Their solution is logical, if brutal. remove the source. They recommend amputation. There is no anaesthetic, only a few strong men to hold you down and a bottle of rough wine or ale to dull your senses if you're lucky. The barber surgeon takes out his saw. It's the same one he uses for cutting bone and, for all you know, wood. The procedure is a blur of unimaginable pain, a desperate, agonising attempt to trade a limb for a life. Historians still argue whether the shock and trauma of such a procedure killed more patients than the infections it was meant to prevent. The chances of surviving the surgery itself were grim, and the odds of the wound from the amputation becoming infected were nearly 100%. Let's consider a less dramatic but equally deadly scenario. Instead of a splinter, you get a deep cut from a rusty nail in the yard. You clean it as best you can with water from the well. But the nail was contaminated with Clostridium tetani, a bacterium found in soil and manure. A week later, your jaw feels stiff, then your neck. Soon, you're experiencing horrific muscle spasms. Your back arches uncontrollably, and your face is pulled into a terrifying fixed grin, the rissus sardonicus. This is tetanus, or lockjaw, and it is one of the most agonising ways to die. There is no cure. Your mind remains clear as your body is racked by convulsions until your muscles, including those used for breathing, finally seize up completely. This is the reality of a world without germ theory. The connection between dirt and disease is fuzzy at best. A quirky fringe belief held by some was that a wound could be healed by treating the weapon that caused it. So if you were cut by a sword, they would ignore your bleeding arm and instead apply salves and bandages to the sword itself, believing it would magically heal the injury from a distance. As you can imagine, this method had a rather low success rate. Your body is a fortress, but every tiny break in the walls, every scratch, cut, or blister from a new pair of leather shoes is a potential gateway for a besieging army of microbes. You survived a major illness, but now you might be brought down by a wooden spoon. It's a constant, terrifying lottery. You learn to be careful, to treat even the smallest wound with a sense of gravity, because you know that in this world there is no such thing as a minor injury. Somehow, you avoid sepsis from a splinter and dodge tetanus from a nail. You've reached the ripe old age of 7. In our world, this means starting 2nd grade, learning multiplication tables and looking forward to summer vacation. In your world, it means your childhood is officially over. It's time to go to work. There is no concept of a protected, playful childhood that extends into your teens. You're now considered a small adult and you're expected to contribute to the family's survival. Your career begins now, and it comes with no training manual, no safety equipment, and no such thing as an 8-hour day. Your apprenticeship for life started years ago, of course. As a toddler, you were tasked with simple things like chasing chickens out of the garden or gathering fallen branches for firewood. But now, your tasks become more serious, more demanding, and far more dangerous. Your specific job depends on your gender and your family's station. Let's say you're a boy. Your father takes you out to the fields with him at dawn. Your job is to walk alongside the oxen as he guides the heavy plough. The plough itself is a formidable piece of equipment, with a sharp iron blade designed to cut through the tough soil. You have to keep the oxen moving at a steady pace, prodding them with a stick, all while making sure you don't trip and fall into the path of the ploughshare. It's exhausting work, trudging through the muddy furrows from sunrise to sunset. Your other main job is scaring birds away from the newly sown seeds and the ripening crops. You'll spend countless hours standing in a field, armed with a slingshot or just your own voice, shouting and hurling stones to protect the family's future harvest. It's boring, lonely, and exposes you to the elements all day long. If you're a girl, your work is centered on the home, but it's no less grueling. You're now your mother's primary assistant. Your day starts before the sun is up, grinding grain for the daily bread with a heavy stone quern. Your arms ache, but you keep grinding. You're taught to spin wool into thread using a drop spindle, a skill that requires endless practice and patience. The thread you produce is essential for making the family's clothes. You help with the cooking, the mending, the weeding of the vegetable garden, and the milking of the family cow or goat. One of your most physically demanding jobs is fetching water. You'll haul 2 heavy wooden buckets from the village well or river back to the cottage, multiple times a day. Your shoulders and back are in a state of constant strain. These aren't just chores. This is your full-time occupation, and it's filled with hazards. As a boy in the fields, you're at risk of being kicked or gored by a frustrated ox. The simple scythe used to cut hay is razor sharp and can easily sever a finger, or slice open a leg with one clumsy movement. As a girl working by the hearth, the risk of setting your clothes on fire is constant. Reaching over the open flames to stir the pottage, your woolen dress or loose sleeve could ignite in an instant. A severe burn, as we know, is a life-threatening injury. A major historical fact is that this early entry into the workforce was universal for the peasantry, which made up over 90% of the population. The concept of formal education was a privilege reserved for the very wealthy, or those destined for the church. For you, the fields and the cottage are your only school, and the lessons are in survival. If you live in a town, your career path might be different but equally perilous. At 7 or 8, you could be apprenticed to a master craftsman. This was a formal arrangement where your parents would essentially sign you over to a master for a period of 7 to 10 years. You would live in his house, and in exchange for your labour, he would teach you his trade and provide food and lodging. It sounds like a good deal, but it could be a brutal existence. You're at the complete mercy of your master. If he is kind, you learn a valuable skill. If he is cruel, you endure years of abuse and overwork with no recourse. Imagine being apprenticed to a blacksmith. You spend your days in a hot, dark forge, pumping the bellows to keep the fire roaring. The air is thick with smoke and coal dust, which you breathe into your young lungs day after day. You're surrounded by hot metal, flying sparks, and powerful hammer blows that could crush a hand in a second. Or perhaps you're apprenticed to a tanner. You'll spend your days scraping flesh from rotting hides and treating them in vats of urine and dog dung, a process that stinks to high heaven and exposes you to a host of diseases. Historians still argue whether the apprentice system was a form of education or a system of institutionalized child labour. In reality, it was both. Here's a quirky and rather grim tidbit about child labour. Children were often used for jobs that required small bodies. Chimney sweeping is the classic example from a later period, but in the Middle Ages children were employed as trapper boys in early mining operations. Their job was to sit in total darkness in a narrow tunnel, all day long, and pull a string to open a ventilation door when they heard a coal cart approaching. It was a terrifyingly lonely and dangerous job, with the constant risk of tunnel collapses and gas explosions. Whether you're in the field, by the hearth, or in a workshop, your body is being subjected to incredible strain. The repetitive motions, the heavy lifting, and the long hours take their toll. Your bones, which are still growing, can become malformed. Your joints ache. You're in a state of chronic fatigue. There are no weekends, no sick days, no child labour laws. Work is relentless, a constant pressure that shapes your body and your mind. You have survived infancy and the dangers of toddlerhood, only to be thrown into a life of hard labour that will wear you down year by year, making you old long before your time. You've toiled through your childhood and have now reached your mid to late teens. You're no longer a child labourer, you're a young adult, hardened by years of work in the fields or the home. Life is still a grind, but a new and powerful force enters your life, the prospect of marriage. In a world with few distractions, the pull of companionship and the establishment of your own family is a major milestone. Finding a partner might bring a measure of joy and personal fulfillment, but it also introduces one of the single most dangerous events in the medieval world, especially for women: childbirth. For you, as a young man, marriage is primarily an economic proposition. Your choice of a wife isn't about romantic love in the modern sense. It's about finding a partner who is a good worker, healthy, and from a respectable family. A good wife can spin, cook, manage a household, and most importantly bear children to help on the farm and continue the family line. Your parents will have a significant say in the matter, negotiating with the bride's family over the dowry, the goods, land, or money she brings into the marriage. It's a practical, business-like arrangement. Love, if it develops, is a bonus that comes after the contract is sealed. For you as a young woman, you have even less say in the matter. Your father will choose your husband. Your value on the marriage market is determined by your reputation for hard work, your perceived fertility, and the size of your dowry. You might meet your husband for the first time just weeks or even days before the wedding. A mainstream historical fact is that the age of consent for marriage was shockingly low by modern standards, 12 for girls and 14 for boys. While most peasants tended to marry later in their late teens or early 20s, the law permitted these very early unions, particularly among the nobility for political alliances. The wedding itself is a simple affair. There's no white dress or fancy tuxedo. You wear your best clothes, which are likely just your normal clothes, but cleaner. The ceremony involves a priest at the church door, followed by a small feast at your family's cottage if you can afford it. Then you move in together, often into a small cottage of your own, or perhaps just a section of your parents' house. Your new life begins, and soon the inevitable happens. You, the wife, are pregnant. This is a cause for celebration. It's the fulfillment of your primary role in this society. But beneath the joy is a deep, unspoken fear, because everyone knows someone, a sister, a cousin, a neighbour, who died in childbirth. For the next 9 months you continue your work as usual. There's no concept of maternity leave. You're still hauling water, grinding grain, and working in the garden, right up until the pains begin. When labour starts, you enter what was known as the lying-in period. You're confined to your bed, and the room is prepared. Windows are shuttered to keep out drafts and, it was believed, evil spirits. A fire is lit regardless of the season, making the room hot and stuffy. Your husband and any other men are sent away. The birthing room is an exclusively female domain. Your mother, sisters, and the local midwife, our old friend Elspeth, gather to assist you. The process is a grueling marathon. There are no painkillers, no epidurals. Your only relief is a cloth to bite on, the soothing words of the other women, and fervent prayers to St. Margaret, the patron saint of childbirth, whose girdle was sometimes rented out to labouring women as a holy relic to wrap around their waist. Historians still argue about the true role of the all-female birthing chamber. Was it a supportive, empowering space, or was it a place where harmful folk traditions and unhygienic practices were perpetuated without question? If the labour is straightforward, you might deliver a healthy baby after several hours and survive the ordeal, exhausted but intact. But complications are terrifyingly common. If the baby is in the wrong position, or breech, the midwife's only recourse is to try and turn it by hand, a painful and dangerous procedure. If the labour goes on for too long, you become exhausted and dehydrated, and the risk of infection climbs with every passing hour. If the baby is too large or the pelvis too small, a common problem due to poor childhood nutrition, the baby can get stuck. In this scenario, there are no good options. A caesarean section was known to exist, but it was almost exclusively performed on a mother who had already died, in a desperate attempt to save the child for baptism. It was not a procedure that a living mother could survive. A quirky and horrifying tidbit of medieval obstetrics involves the use of surgical instruments if the baby could not be delivered. If the child was presumed dead in the womb, a surgeon might be called in to perform an embryotomy, dismembering the fetus in the uterus so it could be extracted in pieces to save the mother's life. These procedures were brutal, performed without anaesthetic, and carried an immense risk of causing fatal internal injuries and infection. Even if you successfully deliver the baby, you're not out of the woods. The third stage of labour, delivering the placenta, is fraught with peril. If it doesn't come out completely, it can lead to hemorrhage or a deadly postpartum infection known as childbed fever. In a world without sterile instruments and with midwives whose hands were not clean, the introduction of bacteria into the uterus was almost guaranteed. You could survive the birth itself, only to die a week later from a raging fever, leaving behind a newborn child who now also has a poor chance of survival. Maternal mortality rates were staggeringly high. It's estimated that for every 100 births, at least 1 to 2 mothers died, meaning a woman with multiple children faced a significant cumulative risk of death. For you, the young husband, you wait outside, listening to the sounds from the birthing room with a sense of utter helplessness. The life of your wife and your first child are completely out of your hands. The joy of becoming a father is overshadowed by the very real possibility that you could become a widower in the same instant. Marriage and children are the cornerstones of your society, but for every new life brought into the world, the shadow of death looms menacingly over the mother. Let's say you and your spouse have navigated the perilous waters of childbirth. You have a small but growing family, a cottage to your name, and a routine of hard work that, while exhausting, provides for your basic needs. You are, by the standards of your time, doing all right. You keep your head down, you work your land, and you try not to cause any trouble. But in the medieval world, trouble has a way of finding you, and when it does, you'll come face to face with a system of justice that is swift, brutal, and has a very different understanding of innocent until proven guilty. One evening, a dispute with your neighbour over a wandering pig escalates. Harsh words are exchanged. The next day, his prize pig is found dead, and he accuses you of killing it. In a small village where everyone knows everyone else's business, an accusation like this is a serious matter. The village reeve, a sort of local official, is called to investigate. There are no forensics, no CSI peasant village. The investigation consists of listening to your neighbour's angry testimony and your own frightened denials. With no clear evidence, the matter is brought before the local manorial court, presided over by the Lord of the Manor's steward. Your experience in court is nothing like a modern legal proceeding. You have no right to a lawyer. The rules of evidence are flexible. Hearsay and personal reputation carry enormous weight. A panel of your neighbours, who are also your rivals and gossips, may be called to swear to your character. If you're generally well liked, they might support you. If you've made a few enemies, this is their chance for payback. Let's assume the court can't reach a clear verdict based on testimony alone. The matter is now at an impasse. In cases like this, the court could turn to a method that seems utterly insane to us: the trial by ordeal. Trial by ordeal was based on the belief that God would intervene to protect the innocent and reveal the guilty. It was a divine judgment, a way of letting heaven decide. This wasn't some fringe practice. For a significant part of the early Middle Ages, it was a legitimate and widely used legal tool, sanctioned by both secular and religious authorities. A major historical fact is that the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 formally forbade priests from participating in trials by ordeal, which led to their gradual decline and replacement by trial by jury, but the practice lingered in folk justice for a long time. You, the accused, are now facing one of several terrifying options. The most common was the ordeal of hot iron. You would be required to carry a piece of red-hot iron for a set distance, usually a few paces. Your hand would then be bandaged and sealed by the priest. After 3 days, the bandages would be removed. If the wound was healing cleanly, God had proclaimed your innocence. If it was festering and infected, which, given the lack of antiseptic care, was almost certain, you were guilty. Another popular choice was the ordeal of hot water. You would have to plunge your arm into a cauldron of boiling water to retrieve a stone or a holy ring from the bottom. Again, your arm would be bandaged, and the state of the wound after 3 days would determine your fate. The logic was that God would miraculously prevent the boiling water from scalding an innocent person. Perhaps the most famous, though more often used for accusations of witchcraft, was the ordeal of cold water. You would be bound, thumb to opposite toe, and thrown into the local river or pond. The water, having been blessed, was considered pure and would therefore reject a guilty person. If you floated, you were guilty. If you sank, the pure water had accepted you, and you were innocent. Of course, by the time they pulled your innocent, sunken body out of the river, you might have already drowned. It's a classic damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario. Historians still argue about the true purpose of these ordeals. Were they genuinely believed to be a conduit for divine judgment, or were they a form of psychological coercion, designed to scare a confession out of the guilty before the ordeal even took place? It's likely a bit of both. The sheer terror of having to carry a glowing piece of iron might be enough to make a guilty person admit their crime. Let's imagine you are sentenced to the ordeal of hot iron for that pig-killing accusation. The entire village gathers to watch. A priest says a prayer as the blacksmith pulls the iron bar from the forge, its heat radiating across the churchyard. Your heart pounds in your chest. You know that no matter what, this is going to hurt. You take the iron, the searing pain is instantaneous and blinding, and you stumble the required 3 paces before dropping it with a cry. Your hand is a mess of blistered, scorched flesh. It's wrapped, sealed, and you spend the next 3 days in an agony of pain and terror, praying for a miracle as you feel the infection beginning to take hold. Even if you're acquitted, justice in this era is physically brutal. Punishments for crimes were a public spectacle, meant to deter others. For a minor theft, you could be put in the stocks or the pillory, where you would be pelted with rotten food and animal dung by your neighbours for hours. For a more serious crime, like poaching a deer from the Lord's forest, you could be branded with a hot iron, or have a hand chopped off. And for the most serious crimes, like murder or treason, the punishments were designed to be as agonising and humiliating as possible. Hanging, drawing and quartering was a particularly gruesome fate. There's a quirky tidbit of legal history from this time: the right of sanctuary. If you were accused of a crime, you could flee to the nearest church and claim sanctuary. As long as you were inside the church, you were legally protected from arrest. You then had 40 days to either negotiate a pardon, face trial, or agree to abjure the realm, to confess your crime and be exiled, walking to the nearest port with a wooden cross and taking the first ship out of the country, never to return. It was a strange legal escape hatch in a very harsh system. As you wait for your bandaged hand to be unwrapped, you realise the fragility of your existence. Your life and reputation can be destroyed by a neighbour's lie, and your innocence can be proven by a method that maims you for life. Justice isn't about truth, it's about power, community pressure, and a terrifying appeal to a silent heaven. Your hand, against all odds, begins to heal. The infection subsides, and while you're left with a nasty scar that serves as a permanent reminder of your brush with medieval justice, you're declared innocent. The ordeal is over. You return to your family and your fields, hoping for a long, quiet period of unremarkable survival. You focus on the one thing that underpins your entire existence, the land. But the land and the weather that governs it is a fickle and unforgiving master. You're about to learn that the greatest threat to your life isn't a sudden illness or a neighbour's accusation, but a slow, creeping disaster that can starve not just your family but an entire continent. Your life is dictated by the seasons. You know the rhythm of the agricultural year in your bones. You know when to plough, when to sow, and when to reap. Your family's entire stock of food for the coming year depends on the success of a single harvest in the late summer. A good harvest means a winter with enough bread and a small surplus to maybe sell or trade. A bad harvest is a catastrophe. This year, something is wrong. The spring, which should be a time of gentle rain and growing warmth, is cold and relentlessly wet. The fields are waterlogged, turning your carefully ploughed furrows into muddy trenches. You and your father try to sow the seeds, oats, barley, a little wheat, but the conditions are terrible. Much of the seed rots in the cold, wet ground before it can even sprout. What does grow is stunted and pale. You pray for sun, for warmth, for a change. But the rain continues day after day, week after week. Summer arrives, but the weather doesn't improve. The sun is a rare visitor, a pale disk behind a constant blanket of grey cloud. The crops that survived the spring struggle, their growth anemic. The hay in the meadows, needed to feed your precious livestock through the winter, is soaked and begins to mould before you can even cut it. A sense of quiet panic begins to creep through the village. Everyone's fields look the same. The old-timers shake their heads and mutter that they've never seen a summer like it. This isn't just a local problem. What you're experiencing is a massive climate shift, a period of cooling and unpredictable weather that historians now call the Little Ice Age. A major historical fact is that this period, beginning roughly around 1300, saw temperatures drop and weather patterns become erratic across the northern hemisphere. It had a devastating impact on agriculture, which was finely tuned to the previously warmer, more stable climate of the medieval warm period. The harvest, when it finally comes, is pitiful. You reap less than half of what you would in a normal year. The grain is damp and of poor quality. As you store it, you know it's susceptible to mould and rot. The mood in the village is grim. There is no surplus. Everyone is facing the same bleak prospect. A long, hard winter with dwindling supplies. The first few months are manageable. You ration carefully. The bread slices get thinner. The pottage is watery, more cabbage and leeks than anything else. But as winter deepens, the real hunger begins. The grain stores shrink at an alarming rate. You and your family are constantly, painfully hungry. The cold seeps into your bones, and with no extra calories to burn, it feels more bitter than ever before. Your livestock begins to suffer. The mouldy hay you manage to salvage provides little nutrition. Your cow, a vital source of milk, butter and cheese, grows thin, and her milk dries up. Desperate, you and your father are forced to make a terrible decision. You slaughter the cow for meat. This provides a temporary reprieve, a few weeks of precious protein, but you have just killed a long-term asset for a short-term gain. It's a sign of true desperation. You even have to slaughter your ox, your living tractor, meaning next year's ploughing will be nearly impossible. By late winter, the situation is dire. You're eating bread made from anything you can grind into flour. Acorns, tree bark, dried peas. It's gritty, foul-tasting, and provides little nourishment. People in the village begin to die. The old and the very young are the first to go, their bodies too weak to withstand the combined assault of cold and starvation. You see your neighbours, once sturdy and strong, now reduced to skeletal figures with hollow eyes. The social fabric of the village begins to tear. Food is hoarded, thefts become common. The community that once gathered to watch your ordeal by iron is now a collection of desperate individuals, each family fighting for its own survival. Historians still argue about the full extent of the horror during the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, the most extreme event of this period, which was triggered by exactly this kind of catastrophic, persistent rain. Contemporary chroniclers write of unspeakable acts, of desperate people eating their own children, of digging up the recently buried to consume their corpses. While likely exaggerated for dramatic effect, the core truth is undeniable. Society was pushed to the absolute brink. There's a quirky and tragic economic tidbit from this time. The price of grain skyrocketed to levels never before seen. A peasant farmer like you, who in a normal year would be a seller of grain, is now forced to try and buy it at these impossible prices, selling off every last possession, your tools, your pots, your very clothes, just to afford a few pounds of wheat. It was a vicious cycle. The famine didn't just kill people through starvation, it utterly bankrupted them, ensuring that even if they survived, they would be destitute for years to come. You survive the winter, but you are a ghost of your former self. You are emaciated, weak, and your body is racked with deficiency diseases like scurvy. You have survived the failed harvest, but the spectre of hunger has left a permanent mark on you. You now understand that your life balances on the edge of a knife, and that a few extra inches of rain at the wrong time of year is all it takes to plunge you and everyone you know into a nightmare of starvation, from which there is no easy escape. You have stared starvation in the face, and through a combination of luck and desperate measures, you've survived. The famine has loosened its grip, and a few seasons of better weather have allowed the village to slowly, painfully get back on its feet. You're in your early 20s now, wiry and tough. You've endured sickness, injustice, and hunger. You might be forgiven for thinking you've seen the worst this world can throw at you. But one autumn evening, as you sit with your family by the hearth, you'll be reminded of another ever-present danger, one that can erase your entire world in a matter of hours. Fire. Your village is a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Every single house, including your own, is built from highly flammable materials. The walls are wattle and daub, a lattice of wood woven with twigs and covered in a plaster of clay, straw and dung. The roof is a thick layer of dried thatch. The floor is strewn with straw for warmth and to soak up the damp. Your furniture is wood. Your clothes are wool and linen. Your bed is a straw-stuffed mattress. You live, sleep and eat inside a pile of kindling. Heat and light come from a single source, the open fire in the centre of the room. It's a pit of glowing embers that is never truly extinguished. At night, your parents carefully bank the coals with ash to keep them alive until morning, so they don't have to waste precious effort starting a new fire. This perpetual, smouldering heart of your home is both a necessity and a constant menace. Tonight, a strong wind is blowing, rattling the simple wooden shutter on your window opening. The wind finds its way down the smoke hole in the roof, a simple opening in the thatch designed to let the smoke and much of the heat escape. It gusts down, whipping the embers in the hearth into a frenzy. A single large spark, bigger than usual, is carried up by the draught. It doesn't make it out of the smoke hole. Instead, it lands on the dry, tinder-like thatch of your roof. At first, nothing happens. It's just a tiny, glowing orange spot in the darkness. But the wind coaxes it, nurtures it. A small wisp of smoke appears, then a tiny flicker of flame. Inside, you notice nothing, perhaps just a slightly stronger smell of smoke than usual. But outside, on your roof, the flame catches. Thatch burns with incredible speed and intensity. In less than a minute, the small flame has become a roaring blaze, and your entire roof is an inferno. The first you know of it is a sudden, terrifying roar from above, and a shower of burning straw falling into the room. Panic erupts. Your father shouts, your mother screams. The room, lit only by the hearth moments before, is now bathed in a hellish orange light. The heat is immense. The air fills with thick, choking smoke. You have seconds to get out. You grab your sleeping child, your wife scrambles after you, and your parents follow as you all stumble blindly out of the door, coughing and gasping for air. You turn back to look at your home, and it's already a lost cause, a tower of flame lighting up the night sky. but the disaster is just beginning. The same wind that fanned the spark on your roof is now carrying burning chunks of thatch to your neighbours' houses. The houses in your village are clustered tightly together, separated by only a few feet. A flaming piece of your roof lands on the thatch of the cottage next door, and then the one next to that. The fire leaps from roof to roof with terrifying speed. Within minutes, your personal catastrophe has become a village-wide inferno. People are screaming, running from their homes in a state of panic, silhouetted against the blaze. There is no fire department, there are no hydrants, there is only the frantic, desperate effort of the community. A major historical fact is that medieval firefighting was rudimentary and largely ineffective against a major blaze. The primary method was the bucket brigade. Villagers would form a human chain from the nearest well or river to the fire, passing buckets of water, hand over hand. But a few gallons of water tossed at the base of a raging inferno does almost nothing. It's a futile, dangerous gesture. The main strategy wasn't to put out the burning houses, but to stop the fire from spreading. This meant creating a firebreak. Armed with long poles tipped with iron hooks, you and the other men of the village would frantically try to pull the thatch off the roofs of houses in the fire's path. Or, more drastically, you would try to tear down an entire house to create a gap that the flames couldn't cross. It's a desperate, life-threatening job. You're working in intense heat, choking smoke, and the constant danger of a collapsing, burning building. The noise is a deafening roar, a combination of the fire, the crashing timbers, and the shouts and screams of the villagers. Livestock, terrified by the flames, break free from their pens and run wild. The fire is a living, breathing monster, consuming everything you and your community have ever built. Historians still argue about the frequency of such devastating fires, but chronicles from the period are filled with accounts of towns and cities being severely damaged or completely destroyed by fire. London, with its densely packed wooden houses, burned catastrophically several times long before the Great Fire of 1666. For a peasant village like yours, built entirely of wood and thatch, a fire was the ultimate nightmare. As dawn breaks, the fire begins to burn itself out, having run out of fuel. You stand in the grey morning light, surveying the devastation. Where your home once stood, there is now just a smouldering, blackened ruin. The same is true for half the village. You have escaped with your life and the clothes on your back. Everything else is gone. Your stored grain, your tools, your cooking pots, the simple wooden chest that held your family's few meagre possessions, all reduced to ash. There's a quirky but telling detail found in some medieval building regulations from larger towns. A requirement for every householder to keep a ladder long enough to reach their roof, and a large tub of water outside their front door at all times. This shows they were keenly aware of the danger, even if their preventative measures were hopelessly inadequate. Your village had no such rules. You have survived the fire, but you are now homeless and destitute, facing the coming winter with nothing. You've been reminded in the most brutal way possible that security is an illusion. Your entire world, the product of a lifetime of labour, can be wiped from the face of the earth by a single, random spark in the night. The struggle to rebuild will be immense, another mountain to climb in a life that has been full of them. The ashes of your home are still warm, and the acrid smell of smoke hangs over the village like a shroud. You and your family have lost everything but each other. You've taken shelter with a neighbour whose house was spared, but you can't stay forever. Your only hope is to journey to the nearby town, a bustling market centre a day's walk away, where your wife has a cousin who works as a weaver. Perhaps he can offer some help, a place to stay, or a chance at work. And so, with nothing but the clothes on your back and a small pouch containing your last few coins, you set out on the open road. This journey, which we would consider a short, simple trip, is for you an epic and dangerous adventure. The concept of a road in your time is very different from our own. Forget smooth asphalt and clear signage. The road you're walking on is a deeply rutted dirt track, churned to mud by cartwheels and the passage of countless hooves. After a recent rain, it's a treacherous quagmire that tries to pull the simple leather shoes from your feet with every step. In dry weather, it's a choking cloud of dust. There are no maps for a commoner like you, only a general sense of direction and the hope that you're following the right path. You walk with a constant sense of vulnerability. You're on foot, moving slowly, and your small family group is an obvious target. The forests and hills that the road passes through are not idyllic nature preserves. They're wild, often lawless places, and the line between a dense wood and a bandit's hideout is perilously thin. Every stranger you see on the road ahead is a potential threat. Is that group of men approaching a company of honest merchants, or are they highwaymen waiting for an easy mark? You instinctively pull your wife and child closer, trying to look as poor and non-threatening as possible, hoping they'll pass you by without a second glance. A major historical fact is that the maintenance of roads was a haphazard and localised affair. The old Roman roads, marvels of engineering, had long since fallen into disrepair. Local lords were technically responsible for the upkeep of roads passing through their lands, but it was a low priority. Travel was slow and arduous for everyone. A journey of 20 miles was a full day's trek on foot, and even a wealthy merchant on horseback would be lucky to cover 30 miles in a day. As you trudge onward, the physical toll is immense. Your feet are blistered and sore. Your child, too young to walk the whole way, has to be carried, adding to the burden. You have no water bottle, so you're forced to drink from streams you pass along the way, a risky proposition that could easily lead to dysentery. The small piece of bread you brought with you is gone by midday. Hunger gnaws at you, a familiar but unwelcome companion. The journey is punctuated by small but significant dangers. You come to a river, but the wooden bridge that once spanned it has been washed away in a flood. Your only option is to find a shallow spot to ford it. You hold your child high as you wade into the cold, fast-flowing water, stumbling on slippery rocks, praying the current doesn't sweep you off your feet. A simple river crossing is a moment of high-stakes tension. Nightfall presents a new set of fears. To be caught on the road after dark is to invite disaster. The darkness is absolute, offering perfect cover for robbers or wolves. Your goal is to reach a roadside inn or a monastery that might offer shelter to travellers. These places provide a measure of safety, but they are not free. You'll have to part with some of your precious few coins for a spot on the floor of a common room, shared with a dozen other snoring, smelly strangers. You sleep with one eye open, your money pouch clutched tightly in your hand. Historians still argue about just how dangerous medieval travel really was. Some accounts paint a picture of roads swarming with outlaws, while official records suggest that violent crime on the highways was less common than we might imagine. The truth is likely somewhere in between. While you might not be accosted by a masked highwayman at every turn, the fear of it was constant, and the risk was always real. Disbanded soldiers, desperate peasants, and professional criminals certainly roam the countryside. Even other travellers could be a source of danger. You might fall in with a group of pilgrims on their way to a shrine. They offer safety in numbers, but they also bring their own risks. A pilgrim from a distant land could be an unknowing carrier of a disease that your village has never been exposed to, a sickness against which you have no immunity. Sharing a drinking cup or a sleeping space with a stranger is a gamble. There's a quirky detail about medieval travel infrastructure: the proliferation of spittals or hospitals. These weren't hospitals in the modern medical sense, but rather charitable houses, often run by religious orders, that provided hospitality to travellers, the poor and the sick. The word hospital shares its root with hospitality. Finding a spittle on your route could mean the difference between a safe night's rest and a dangerous night spent shivering in a ditch. St Cross Hospital in Winchester, for example, has been offering a wayfarer's dole, a small portion of bread and ale, to travellers for nearly 900 years, a tradition that continues to this day. Finally, after a long, gruelling day of walking, you see the stone walls of the town in the distance. You have made it. You're exhausted, sore, and poorer than when you started, but you are safe. The journey has been a microcosm of your life, a struggle against the elements, a navigation of potential threats, and a reliance on your own endurance. You've learned that simply moving from one place to another is a trial in itself, a reminder that in your world there is no such thing as a safe and easy journey. Now you just have to hope that your wife's cousin is happy to see you. You arrive at the town gates dusty and bone-weary, a refugee from your own life. The guard gives you a suspicious look but lets you pass. The town is a chaotic symphony of sights, sounds and smells. It's crowded, noisy, and 10 times filthier than your village, with the contents of chamber pots being tossed from windows into the narrow streets. But it's also a place of opportunity. You find your wife's cousin, a weaver named Thomas, who takes pity on you. He offers you a corner of his small, cramped house and suggests he might be able to get you work as a labourer, carrying wool bales for the merchants. For the first time since the fire, you feel a flicker of hope. You have a chance to start over. But you've forgotten one crucial detail. You may have left your village, but you haven't left the system that governs your life. You're a peasant, a serf, and your life is not your own. You belong to the land, and by extension, you belong to the lord of the manor on which you were born. By leaving his land without permission, you have just committed a crime. A few weeks into your new life in town, a man arrives asking questions. It's the Reeve from your old village, the same man who oversaw your accusation about the pig. He's been sent by your lord to find you and bring you back. Your heart sinks. You are discovered. Thomas, your cousin-in-law, tries to argue, but the law is clear. You are your lord's property, as much as his horse or his fields. To run away is like stealing from him, denying him the labour you owe him. You're unceremoniously escorted back to your old village, a journey even more humiliating than your hopeful trip to the town. You're brought before the lord of the manor himself, or his steward. This isn't a trial, it's a sentencing. Your lord is a man whose power over you is nearly absolute. His whims, his moods, and his economic interests can shape your destiny in an instant. Your attempt to build a new life is seen as an act of rebellion, and it must be punished. You might be fined a ruinous amount of money, plunging you into a debt you can never hope to repay. You might be put in the stocks for a day as a public humiliation, a warning to others who might think of fleeing. He could sentence you to extra work on his own fields known as boon work without any pay. He controls almost every aspect of your life. A major historical fact is that serfdom tied peasants to the land, creating a hereditary class of unfree labourers. A serf could not leave the manor, marry, or even sell an ox without the lord's permission. This system was the economic engine of feudalism for centuries. The lord's power is arbitrary and personal. Let's say he decides to build a new mill. He can compel you, and every other able-bodied man in the village, to work on its construction for weeks on end, neglecting your own fields and your family's needs. Once the mill is built, you are then forbidden from grinding your own grain at home with your hand quern. You must take your grain to the lord's mill and pay him a portion of your flour for the privilege of using it. This was a common and deeply resented monopoly known as a banality. The same applied to the lord's oven for baking bread and his press for making wine or cider. His control extends to your most personal decisions. When you wish to get your daughter married, you must pay a fine to the lord, called a merchet, for the loss of a worker from his manor. If you die, your family is hit with the Hergot, a death tax where the lord is entitled to claim your single best animal, perhaps your only ox or cow, leaving your widow and children in an even more precarious position. Historians still argue about the day-to-day reality of the lord-peasant relationship. Was it a constant, brutal oppression, or was it a more complex relationship of mutual, if highly unequal, obligation? The lord provided land and, in theory, protection from outside threats like bandits or invading armies. In return, you provided labour and a share of your produce. Some lords were relatively benign, content to simply collect their dues. Others were tyrannical, constantly seeking new ways to extract wealth from their tenants. Your fate is a lottery, entirely dependent on the character of the man who owns the land you live on. There's a quirky but telling example of the lord's power, the droit du seigneur, or right of the lord, the supposed right of a feudal lord to sleep with a vassal's bride on her wedding night. While it makes for dramatic storytelling and pops up in movies like Hearth, most modern historians agree that this was almost certainly a myth, or at best a symbolic ritual that was paid off with a fine rather than as acted physically. However, the fact that the myth existed and was believed speaks volumes about the perceived boundlessness of the lord's power over the lives and bodies of his peasants. You stand before the steward, head bowed, and accept your punishment. Your brief dream of a new life in town is over. You're sent back to the fields, back to the endless cycle of labour for another man's profit. You will be tasked with rebuilding your burned-down cottage, but the wood will come from the lord's forest, and you will owe him for it. You're trapped. You've survived fire and famine, but you cannot escape the rigid social structure that has been in place for generations. Your landlord doesn't just own your land. In a very real sense, he owns you. Your path is not your own to choose, and any attempt to stray from it will be met with the full force of the system designed to keep you exactly where you are. You serve your punishment, humbled and trapped. The Lord's Reeve watches you with a smug satisfaction as you toil on the Lord's land, paying off your debt for the crime of seeking a better life. You fall back into the familiar, grueling rhythm of a peasant's existence, your brief taste of town life now just a bitter memory. You focus on your family, your small plot of land, and the overwhelming task of just getting by. You might think that by keeping your head down and following the rules, you can find a semblance of peace. But you're about to discover that your safety depends not only on your own lord's whims, but on his relationship with his neighbours. You don't need a great war between kings to get you killed. A petty squabble between two local barons is more than enough. Your lord, Sir Giles, is a man of middling importance. He holds a few manors, can muster a small number of men-at-arms, and has a temper as short as his pedigree. His neighbour, the Baron de Courcy, is a slightly more powerful lord who believes a certain tract of woodland and a stream currently on your lord's estate rightfully belong to him. This isn't a matter for a courtroom. It's a matter of honour and, more importantly, resources. The dispute simmers for a season, with angry messages passed back and forth. Then, one morning, it boils over. The Baron, tired of negotiating, decides to take what he believes is his. He rides onto your lord's land with a force of about 30 men, a few knights in mail, some mounted sergeants, and a rough-looking company of mercenary foot soldiers armed with spears and crossbows. This isn't a formal declaration of war. It's a raid, a violent and destructive enterprise designed to inflict economic damage and assert dominance. In your world, this is called a chevauchée. The first sign of trouble is the distant sound of a horn, followed by panicked shouts from the far side of the village. Soon you see them, armed men on horseback riding through the fields, trampling the very crops you have so painstakingly cultivated. Your heart freezes. This is the protection your lord was meant to provide you from. There is no glorious battle, no heroic charge. The Baron's men are not here to fight your lord's small garrison head-on. They are here to terrorise and pillage. You and the other villagers run for the flimsy safety of the church, the only stone building in the vicinity, huddling together in the nave as you listen to the sounds of your world being destroyed. The raiders swarm through the village. They break down the doors of the cottages, stealing anything of value: a pot, a blanket, a chicken. They set fire to the hayricks and the grain stores, a deliberate act of economic warfare designed to cripple your lord for the coming season. You, as a young, able-bodied man, are a valuable commodity. A few of the Baron's men kick open the church door. Panic erupts. They aren't here to kill everyone, but to take hostages for ransom and to capture useful labourers. You are grabbed, your arms twisted behind your back and bound with rope. You're now a prisoner of war in a conflict you have no stake in. You're dragged outside into the chaos. Your wife screams your name, but she is shoved back by a soldier. A major historical fact is that this kind of low-level private warfare was endemic throughout much of the Middle Ages. Feudalism, with its decentralised power structure, meant that thousands of local lords had the military capacity and legal pretext to wage war on their rivals. These were not the great nation-defining conflicts like the 100 Years' War, but constant, localised attritional violence that made life for the peasantry a nightmare. The king's peace was often a fiction in the face of a determined local baron. You are roped together with a dozen other men from your village and marched away. You are now part of the loot. You might be held at the Baron de Courcy's small castle, until your lord Sir Giles pays a ransom for your return. Or if the Baron decides you're a good worker, he might just force you to become one of his own serfs, and you'll spend the rest of your life working for your captor. Your life has been completely upended by a squabble over a few acres of trees. But your lord Sir Giles is not a man to take such an insult lying down. He gathers his own small force and rides out in pursuit. The inevitable clash happens not in an open field, but in a messy, chaotic skirmish on the road. This is where you can easily die. You're a prisoner, unarmed and tied up. You could be cut down by a stray arrow, trampled by a horse, or killed by one of your captors who decides you're too much trouble to guard in a fight. There's a quirky but brutal aspect to this kind of warfare: the crossbow. Once considered a dastardly and unchivalrous weapon, it was even banned by the church for use against fellow Christians, a ban that was universally ignored. Why? Because it was too effective. A peasant with a crossbow and a few weeks of training could kill a noble knight in full armour, a man who had trained his entire life for war. It was a disruptive technology that threatened the aristocratic monopoly on violence. For you, It just means that death can come from a distance, with a sudden sharp thwack. Historians still argue about the true nature of the medieval man-at-arms. Were they chivalrous warriors bound by a code of honour, or were they little more than professional thugs, violent men who profited from a system of organised extortion? The reality, as you're experiencing it, is that they are men with weapons who are following their lord's orders, and those orders involve burning your livelihood and taking you captive. As the skirmish rages around you, you lie in a ditch, trying to make yourself as small as possible. The air is filled with the clang of steel, the screams of men, and the thud of crossbow bolts hitting shields and flesh. You are completely powerless, a piece of driftwood in a violent current. It doesn't matter who wins this pathetic little war. Your crops are burned, your village is pillaged, and your life hangs by a thread, all because two petty nobles couldn't agree on a property line. You have learned another harsh lesson. Even when you follow all the rules, the violence of the powerful can sweep you away without a moment's notice. The skirmish dies down as quickly as it began. Your lord Sir Giles manages to drive off the Baron de Courcy's men in a messy, undignified clash of arms. You are rescued along with the other captured men from your village. The feeling is not one of liberation, but of being repossessed. You are your lord's property, and he has just recovered you. You are marched back to the village, which is now scarred by the raid, trampled fields, a few smouldering huts, and a lingering sense of violation. Life, already hard, has been made harder. But you are alive, and for now, that has to be enough. The village licks its wounds. The rhythm of life resumes, but it's a limping, fragile rhythm. You work to repair the damage, to salvage what you can, acutely aware of how quickly your world can be torn apart by the ambitions of petty warlords. As the seasons turn, a new kind of fear begins to trickle into your world. It arrives not with the sound of a horn and armed men, but in whispers. A travelling friar, stopping for a night, speaks of a great pestilence in the east, a disease that can empty a city in a month. A merchant passing through tells tales of Italian ports where ships are found drifting with their entire crews dead. The stories are terrifying, but distant. It's happening somewhere else to other people. It's like hearing a story about a dragon. It's frightening, but not something you expect to see in your own backyard. Then, the distance shrinks. The whispers become reports. The plague is in France. It's in the big port cities. It's moving inland. They say it is carried on the air, a foul miasma that kills all it touches. They say it is a punishment from God for the sins of mankind. One autumn afternoon, a man stumbles into your village. He's a wool merchant and his cart has a broken axle. He's feverish and weak, leaning heavily on a staff. He asks for a place to lie down. Your neighbour, a kind woman named Edith, takes him into her cottage. You watch from a distance, a knot of unease tightening in your stomach. The man's sickness seems more than just a common fever. 2 days later, he is dead. Edith and her family bury him quietly in the churchyard. A week later, Edith is sick. She complains of a burning fever and a deep ache in her bones. Then the telltale sign appears, a grotesque, painful swelling in her armpit, hard and tender to the touch. It grows with terrifying speed, to the size of an apple. Within a day, more appear on her neck and in her groin. Her skin takes on a dusky hue and dark splotches appear on her body. The village healer's remedies are useless. The priest's prayers go unanswered. Edith dies screaming in agony, and then it begins. Edith's husband gets sick, then her children, the family in the cottage next to hers. The plague, the great dying, has arrived. It spreads with the stealth of a cat and the speed of a fire. A major historical fact is that this was the Black Death, a pandemic of bubonic plague caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. It was carried by fleas that lived on black rats, which infested the homes, ships, and trade routes of the medieval world. When a flea bit an infected rat, and then a human, the disease was transmitted. You don't know this, of course. All you know is that an invisible demon is stalking your village. Panic, a far deeper and more primal terror than you felt during the raid, grips the community. The doctor's theories of the four humours are laughably useless against this. Bleeding a patient only seems to make them die faster. The bonds of family and community, already frayed by hardship, now snap. People bar their doors, refusing to help their sick neighbours. A husband abandons his wife. Parents, in their terror, abandon their children. You hear muffled cries and delirious moans from the shuttered cottages around you. The village priest, a good man who tirelessly went from house to house to offer last rites, is one of the first to fall. After him, no one dares touch the sick or bury the dead. The bodies are left to rot in their homes, or are dragged out and thrown into a common pit. Historians still argue about the precise death toll, but in some regions it may have been far higher than the commonly cited 1/3 of Europe, with entire villages wiped off the map completely. Your village is becoming one of them. Every morning you look out and see another house silent, another family gone. One day you see a strange procession on the road that passes by your village. It's a group of flagellants stripped to the waist, marching and chanting, rhythmically whipping their own backs with leather cords tipped with iron. They believe the plague is God's wrath, and only through this extreme bloody penance can they hope to appease him and ward off the pestilence. It's a bizarre, horrifying spectacle of public devotion and utter desperation. A Hail Mary pass for the soul of mankind. Then the plague enters your own home. It is your father. He wakes up shivering, though the room is warm. By noon, he has a raging fever. By evening you see the dreaded bubo, the black swollen gland in his groin. You and your mother watch, helpless, as the disease runs its swift, brutal course. He dies 2 days later, his mind lost to delirium. You have to drag his body out yourself, your face wrapped in a cloth, your heart a cold, dead stone in your chest. You have no time to grieve, you're now just waiting. Is it your mother next? Your wife? Your child? Is it you? The days blur into a nightmare of fear. The village grows quiet. The silence is the most terrifying thing of all. No children playing, no dog barking, no clang of the blacksmith's hammer, just the wind and the sound of your own ragged breath. You are one of the few left standing in a graveyard of your own memories. The plague burns through your village, and as mysteriously as it arrived, it begins to recede. The wave of death crests, breaks, and slowly rolls back out to sea, leaving behind a shattered, silent landscape. You have, through some miracle of chance or constitution, survived. Your wife and child have also been spared, but you have lost your mother, your father, and more than half of the people you have ever known. The silence that settles over the village is not peaceful. It is the profound, echoing silence of absence. You step out of your cottage into a world that is both familiar and irrevocably broken. You look at the cottage next door, once home to Edith and her family, now a dark, empty shell. The cottage beyond that is also empty, and the one beyond that. The fields, which should be bustling with activity for the upcoming planting season, are deserted and overgrown with weeds. The blacksmith's forge is cold, the mill is silent, the world you knew is gone, and you are left to walk through its ruins. The first and most immediate problem is the work. There are simply not enough people left to do it. The traditional system of agriculture, which relied on the collective labour of the entire village, has collapsed. A major historical fact is that the Black Death caused one of the most severe labour shortages in history. With so many peasants dead, the value of labour skyrocketed. For the first time in your life, you, a humble peasant, have leverage. Your lord, Sir Giles, also survived. Having barricaded himself in his manor house with a skeleton staff, he now faces a crisis. His lands are fallow, and his wealth is tied to the productivity of those lands. He needs workers, and he needs them badly. He orders you and the other handful of surviving men to work the fields, not just your own plots, but his demesne land as well. But something has shifted. For the first time, you have the power to say no. A neighbouring lord, desperate for labourers, sends an agent to your village, secretly offering you something that would have been unthinkable just a year ago: wages. He'll pay you in coin for your labour, and he'll offer you a lease on a plot of land for a fixed rent, freeing you from the traditional obligations of serfdom. It is a dangerous, revolutionary idea. You and the other survivors talk in hushed, excited tones. The world may be broken, but in its breaking the chains of serfdom have been loosened. You and a few others decide to take the risk. You pack your few remaining belongings, and under the cover of darkness, you leave the manor you were born on, the manor you were once dragged back to in disgrace. This time, there is no reeve strong enough to stop you. Your old lord, Sir Giles, can rage and threaten, but he no longer has the power to enforce his will. This is a seismic shift in the social order. The old feudal certainties are crumbling. You arrive at your new manor and begin your life as a wage labourer. The work is still hard, but now you are paid for it. You have a sense of agency you've never experienced before. But the world you've entered is haunted. The trauma of the plague is everywhere. You see it in the hollow eyes of the other survivors. You see it in the abandoned cottages that dot the landscape. The psychological toll is immense. Historians still argue about the long-term psychological impact of the Black Death. Did it lead to a wave of piety and religious devotion, or did it spark a reckless, live-for-the-moment hedonism? The evidence suggests it led to both. In the shadow of such random mass death, some people turn to God, while others turn to the tavern. You see both around you, men who pray for hours and men who drink their wages away as soon as they get them, convinced that death could return at any moment. There's a quirky and macabre artistic trend that emerged in the wake of the plague. The danse macabre, or dance of death. Paintings and woodcuts began to appear showing skeletons representing death, dancing with people from all walks of life. Popes, kings, knights, merchants and peasants like you. The message was clear and stark. Death comes for everyone, regardless of their station. It was a grim, democratic and deeply unsettling art form born directly from the trauma of the pandemic. Life in this post-apocalyptic world is strange and unstable. The labour shortage that gives you power also causes massive economic disruption. With fewer people to feed and fewer people to work, the old systems of supply and demand are turned upside down. The price of grain plummets because there are fewer mouths to eat it, while the price of manufactured goods and labour soars. The old economic order is in chaos. Suspected of sympathising with these heretical notions could put you on a path to destruction. An offhand comment questioning the priest's lavish new vestments, overheard by the wrong person, could be reported to the authorities. An accusation of heresy is terrifyingly easy to make and almost impossible to refute. This fear of unorthodox belief is paralleled by an even older, more primal fear: witchcraft. In the uncertain aftermath of the plague, people are more desperate than ever to find explanations for their misfortune. Why did the cow die? Why did the crops fail? Why did the baby fall sick? It couldn't be random chance or bad hygiene. It must be malice. It must be witchcraft. A major historical fact is that while the great witch hunts are more characteristic of the early modern period, the 16th and 17th centuries, the intellectual and legal framework for them was built in the late Middle Ages. The publication of books like the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, in the late 15th century codified the belief that witchcraft was a vast conspiracy of devil worshippers, primarily women, who sought to destroy Christendom. Your village gets a taste of this paranoia. An old woman named Marjorie, who lives alone at the edge of the village, has always been an object of suspicion. She's a widow, a bit eccentric, and she knows a great deal about herbs. The same kind of knowledge that once made a woman a respected healer can now make her a suspected witch. When a series of small misfortunes strike the village, a sudden hailstorm ruins a field, a child develops a strange rash, the whispers begin. They say Marjorie was seen muttering to her cat. They say she scowled at the farmer whose crop was destroyed. Suspicion hardens into accusation. Marjorie is dragged before the local magistrate. The trial is a farce. Her accusers offer a string of proofs. A neighbour claims she saw Marjorie flying on a broomstick, a classic, if physically impossible, accusation. Another says that after an argument with Marjorie, his milk curdled. Marjorie's panicked denials are taken as proof of her guilt. She is tortured to extract a confession. Under unbearable pain, she admits to anything they want to hear. She danced with the devil, she cursed the village, she turned her neighbour's butter rancid. Her confession seals her fate. She is condemned as a witch and sentenced to be burned. The entire village is compelled to watch the execution. It's a public spectacle, a grim ritual designed to cleanse the community. You stand in the crowd, your stomach churning as you watch the old woman, who you've known your whole life, being tied to a stake. You don't believe she's a witch, but you dare not say a word. To defend a condemned witch is to become a suspected witch yourself. You watch in horrified silence as the torch is put to the pyre. Historians still argue about the true motivations behind the witch hunts. Were they a product of genuine religious hysteria, a tool for social control, or a manifestation of deep-seated misogyny? The answer is likely a complex mixture of all three. But for you, the lesson is brutally simple. Keep your head down. Do not stand out. Conformity is survival. There's a quirky and sad detail about witchcraft accusations, the witch's mark or devil's mark. Witch hunters believed that the devil left a physical mark on his followers' bodies, a mole, a birthmark, or any unusual blemish. An accused witch would be stripped and publicly examined for such marks. A pricker would then test these marks with a long pin, believing that a true witch's mark would be insensitive to pain and would not bleed. In reality, a skilled pricker could use sleight of hand or a retractable needle to prove any mark was diabolical. You walk home from the execution, the smell of smoke clinging to your clothes. The world suddenly feels much more dangerous. It's not just disease, famine, and war you have to fear, but the thoughts in your own head and the suspicions of your neighbours. You have achieved a measure of economic freedom, but you live in a climate of intense ideological and spiritual fear. One wrong word, one unorthodox thought, one deviation from the frightened consensus, and you could be the next one tied to the stake. The smoke from Marjorie's pyre has long since cleared, but a chill remains in the air that has nothing to do with the changing seasons. You've learned a terrible lesson about the dangers of group fear. You keep your opinions to yourself, your head down, your interactions with your neighbours, cordial but cautious. You're now on the cusp of 30, a husband, a father, a tenant farmer. You have survived pestilence, famine, war, and the madness of crowds. As autumn deepens and the last of the harvest is brought in, a familiar ancient adversary looms, winter. This isn't the cosy, festive season of greeting cards. This is the great enemy, a quiet, creeping killer that comes every year to test your preparations and your will to live. The fight against winter began months ago. Every spare moment in the late summer and autumn was spent gathering fuel. You and your family combed the woods and hedgerows for every fallen branch, every dry stick. A major historical fact of peasant life was the strict regulation of woodland. You couldn't just wander into the Lord's forest and chop down a tree for firewood. That was a serious crime. Your rights were usually limited to estover, which meant you could only take what was already dead and on the ground, or what you could pull down with a shepherd's crook, hence the phrase, by hook or by crook. This meant that your fuel supply was always precarious, a constant back-breaking scramble. Your life in the coming months depends entirely on the size of the woodpile stacked against the cottage wall. As the days grow shorter and the light begins to fail, a deep, penetrating cold settles into the earth, into the walls of your house, into your very bones. Your cottage, which feels rustic in the summer, now reveals itself to be a terribly inefficient shield against the cold. The wind whistles through the gaps in the wattle and daub. A damp chill radiates up from the packed earth floor. The smoke hole in the roof, necessary for ventilation, also lets out most of the precious heat from your carefully tended fire. At night, condensation drips from the cold thatch, a constant, miserable reminder of the dampness that surrounds you. Life shrinks. Your world, which in summer stretched to the edges of the fields, now contracts to the four walls of your single-room cottage, and within that cottage it shrinks further, to the small circle of warmth and light cast by the hearth. This is where your family spends almost all of its waking hours. The darkness is profound, almost absolute. Your only light besides the fire might be a single tallow candle made from rendered animal fat. It sputters and smokes, giving off a greasy smell and a feeble flickering light. They are too precious to burn for long. When the sun goes down, a deep ancient darkness envelops the world, and your family with it. Your diet, which had a little variety in the summer with vegetables from the garden, now becomes a monotonous rotation of survival rations. You eat the coarse, dark bread you've baked. You eat pottage, now made mostly from dried peas and the last of the root vegetables. You eat the salted pork from the pig you slaughtered in the autumn. The meat's so salty it makes your teeth ache. The lack of fresh food is a slow poison. Old aches and pains return. Your gums might feel tender, an early sign of scurvy. This chronic low-level malnutrition weakens your body, and just as importantly, your spirit. Every meal is a reminder of how finite your resources are. You can't help but mentally calculate how much is left in the grain bin, knowing that a miscalculation means starvation before the spring thaw. Historians still argue about the nature of peasant life in the winter. Was it a period of forced idleness and relative rest after the back-breaking labour of the harvest? A time for storytelling and community bonding? Or was it a tense, anxious period of indoor work, hunger, and confinement? For you, it's certainly not a vacation. The idle hours are filled with essential tasks. You mend your tools, sharpen your ploughshare for the spring. Your wife sits by the fire, spinning wool into thread, her hands never still. These are not hobbies. This is vital work to ensure you have clothes to wear and tools to work with when the world thaws. There's a quirky but practical aspect of winter survival: sharing your living space. To conserve heat, it was not uncommon for families to bring their most valuable livestock, a calf, a few sheep, the chickens, inside the cottage with them during the coldest spells. Remember the general filth and lack of sanitation? Now add a few farm animals to the mix. The one-room house becomes a crowded, smelly, noisy menagerie. But the shared body heat is a precious resource, and the animals are too valuable to risk losing to the cold. It's a trade-off: hygiene for warmth. The worst comes during a deep freeze. A blizzard might rage for days, piling snow up against your door and making travel impossible. You're completely cut off from the world. If someone falls ill or has an accident, there is no hope of getting help. The cold becomes a physical presence in the cottage. The water in the bucket by the door freezes solid. The fire seems to devour wood while giving off no heat. You and your family huddle together under every scratchy wool blanket and animal hide you own, your breath misting in the air, listening to the wind howl outside like a hungry wolf. This is how winter kills. It isn't a dramatic, sudden event. It's a slow, quiet siege. It drains your resources, saps your strength, and weakens your immune system. That lingering cough, life shrinks. Your world, which in summer stretched to the edges of the fields, now contracts to the four walls of your single-room cottage, and within that cottage it shrinks further, to the small circle of warmth and light cast by the hearth. This is where your family spends almost all of its waking hours. The darkness is profound, almost absolute. Your only light besides the fire might be a single tallow candle made from rendered animal fat. It sputters and smokes, giving off a greasy smell and a feeble flickering light. They are too precious to burn for long. When the sun goes down, a deep ancient darkness envelops the world, and your family with it. Your diet, which had a little variety in the summer with vegetables from the garden, now becomes a monotonous rotation of survival rations. You eat the coarse, dark bread you've baked. You eat pottage, now made mostly from dried peas and the last of the root vegetables. You eat the salted pork from the pig you slaughtered in the autumn, the meat so salty it makes your teeth ache. The lack of fresh food is a slow poison. Old aches and pains return. Your gums might feel tender, an early sign of scurvy. This chronic low-level malnutrition weakens your body, and just as importantly, your spirit. Every meal is a reminder of how finite your resources are. You can't help but mentally calculate how much is left in the grain bin, knowing that a miscalculation means starvation before the spring thaw. Historians still argue about the nature of peasant life in the winter. Was it a period of forced idleness and relative rest after the back-breaking labour of the harvest? A time for storytelling and community bonding? Or was it a tense, anxious period of indoor work, hunger, and confinement? For you, it's certainly not a vacation. The idle hours are filled with essential tasks. You mend your tools, sharpen your ploughshare for the spring. Your wife sits by the fire, spinning wool into thread, her hands never still. These are not hobbies. This is vital work to ensure you have clothes to wear and tools to work with when the world thaws. There's a quirky but practical aspect of winter survival: sharing your living space. To conserve heat, it was not uncommon for families to bring their most valuable livestock, a calf, a few sheep, the chickens, inside the cottage with them during the coldest spells. Remember the general filth and lack of sanitation? Now add a few farm animals to the mix. The one-room house becomes a crowded, smelly, noisy menagerie. But the shared body heat is a precious resource, and the animals are too valuable to risk losing to the cold. It's a trade-off: hygiene for warmth. The worst comes during a deep freeze. A blizzard might rage for days, piling snow up against your door and making travel impossible. You're completely cut off from the world. If someone falls ill or has an accident, there is no hope of getting help. The cold becomes a physical presence in the cottage. The water in the bucket by the door freezes solid. The fire seems to devour wood while giving off no heat. You and your family huddle together under every scratchy wool blanket and animal hide you own, your breath misting in the air, listening to the wind howl outside like a hungry wolf. This is how winter kills. It isn't a dramatic, sudden event. It's a slow, quiet siege. It drains your resources, saps your strength, and weakens your immune system. That lingering cough you picked up in the autumn can now settle in your chest and become pneumonia. A simple slip on the ice outside can lead to a broken bone that will never heal properly. For the old, the young, and anyone all, the grip of winter finally loosens. The snow melts, the days lengthen, and the first tentative signs of spring bring a wave of relief that is almost physical. You've made it through another season of cold and darkness. As you and your fellow villagers emerge from your smoky cottages, blinking in the pale sunlight, the world seems reborn. You turn your attention back to the land, to the cycle of ploughing and planting. But as you venture back into the fields and forests, you're reminded that not all threats to your life come from disease, hunger, or your fellow humans. The natural world, which you depend on for everything, is not a gentle pastoral paradise. It is filled with creatures that can end your story in a sudden, violent encounter. We tend to romanticize the medieval countryside, imagining a landscape of peaceful deer and cheerful, chirping birds. But the reality was far more dangerous. The forests that surround your village are not parks. They are vast, dark, and untamed, and they are home to animals that we now see only in zoos or remote wilderness areas. One of the most feared and respected of these was the wild boar. One afternoon, while searching for stray livestock near the edge of the woods, you hear a sudden angry snorting from a nearby thicket. Before you can react, a massive wild boar bursts from the undergrowth. This is not a domestic pig. It's a muscular, bristly beast weighing hundreds of pounds, with a notoriously foul temper and a pair of sharp, curving tusks that can disembowel a man with a single upward thrust. You have inadvertently cornered it or gotten too close to its young. It charges. You scramble, heart pounding, and barely manage to climb a tree just as the boar thunders past, gashing the bark where your leg was a moment before. You cling to the branch, listening to the enraged animal crashing around below, and wait for it to leave. A boar hunt was a favourite pastime of the nobility, a dangerous and prestigious sport. For a peasant like you, an accidental encounter is a life or death situation. Wolves are another constant lurking threat. While they generally avoid humans, a harsh winter or a lack of their usual prey can make them bold. A lone wolf might not be a major danger to an adult, but a pack is another matter entirely. They're a menace to your livestock, a primary target for them. You live with the constant fear that your sheep, left to graze, will be taken. And tales abound of lone travellers, especially children, being attacked and killed. Every time your child wanders a little too far from the cottage, a flicker of that fear goes through you. A major historical fact is that wolves were a significant enough problem in many parts of medieval Europe that bounties were regularly offered for them, and professional wolf hunters were employed by lords and communities. But the dangers aren't limited to the great beasts of the forest. The most common threats are smaller and closer to home. Remember the rats that infest your village, the carriers of the plague. They are a nuisance in themselves, but they are also prey for other animals. Weasels, stoats, and snakes are common, and while mostly harmless to you, a cornered, frightened snake like an adder could deliver a venomous bite. Without anti-venom, a bite on the hand or leg could be fatal, causing swelling, immense pain, and eventually organ failure. The most insidious threat, however, comes from your domesticated animals. Rabies was a terrifying and not uncommon disease. A stray dog, its mind twisted by the virus, could wander into your village, foaming at the mouth and snapping at anything that moves. A single bite is a death sentence. There is no cure. Days or weeks later, the symptoms would begin. Fever, headache, and then the terrifying neurological signs. Hallucinations, aggression, and hydrophobia, the fear of water, which causes agonizing spasms in the throat. You would die a slow, agonizing death from a disease transmitted by man's best friend. There's a quirky and rather bizarre belief from the time related to this: the hair of the dog. While we now use this phrase to mean taking a drink of alcohol to cure a hangover, it originated as a folk remedy for rabies. It was believed that if you were bitten by a rabid dog, you should take some of the dog's hair and place it in the wound to effect a cure. This, of course, was completely useless, and highlights the desperation and lack of understanding when faced with such a terrifying disease. Historians still argue about how intertwined the lives of medieval peasants were with the wilderness. Was the forest seen primarily as a place of danger and fear, or as a vital resource for food, fuel, and foraging? It was, of course, both. The same woods that harboured wolves and boars also provided nuts, berries, mushrooms, a risky gamble in itself, and the firewood you needed to survive the winter. You had a complex, intimate, and deeply respectful relationship with the natural world, born of both dependence and fear. Even the smallest creatures could pose a threat. A bee sting, for someone with a severe allergy they don't know they have, could lead to anaphylactic shock and a swift death. A spider bite could become infected. The world is full of small, sharp, pointy or poisonous things that can hurt you. You climb down from the tree after the boar has finally moved on, your legs shaking. You've had a stark reminder that you are not at the top of the food chain here. You are part of it. The boundary between the human world of your village and the wild world of the forest is thin and porous. You have survived so much, but a moment of inattention, a bit of bad luck can lead to a violent end in the jaws or on the tusks of a creature that sees you as either a threat or a meal. Nature is not your friend. It is a powerful, indifferent force that you must navigate with caution and respect every single day. The adrenaline from your close encounter with the wild boar fades, leaving you with a shaky resolve to be more careful at the forest's edge. You're now a man in your early 30s, a survivor who has dodged famine, plague, and beast. You might feel a sense of rugged durability. But there is a war being waged inside your own body, in a place you can't see and have no way to fight. A slow, grinding and agonizing conflict is taking place inside your mouth, and it's about to escalate into a life-threatening crisis. Your dental hygiene, as we've established, has been minimal at best. For 30 years you've chewed on tough, gritty bread that wears down your enamel. You've used a twig or a rough cloth to clean your teeth when you remember to. You've never seen a dentist because there's no such thing. The closest you have is the local barber surgeon, the same man who performs bloodletting and minor surgeries, or perhaps a travelling tooth drawer at a market fair whose primary tools are a pair of sturdy pliers and a strong arm. It starts as a dull, intermittent ache in one of your back molars. You ignore it. Aches and pains are a part of life. You have work to do. But the ache doesn't go away. It slowly intensifies, becoming a sharp, throbbing pain that makes it difficult to chew on one side of your mouth. You've developed a cavity, and the decay has now reached the sensitive pulp at the centre of your tooth, causing inflammation and infection. You have a toothache, and it's rapidly becoming the centre of your universe. The pain is relentless. It keeps you awake at night, a pulsing agony that radiates through your jaw and up into your head. You try folk remedies. You might press a clove against the tooth, as the oil has a mild numbing effect. You might rinse your mouth with salt water. A more bizarre and quirky folk belief was that toothaches were caused by a tiny toothworm gnawing at the root. The cure, therefore, was to try and smoke the worm out by inhaling the fumes of henbane seeds heated on a piece of charcoal, a practice that was not only ineffective but also dangerous, as henbane is a poison that can cause hallucinations and delirium. When the pain becomes unbearable, you know you have only one real option. You make your way to the barber surgeon. You sit on a stool in his shop, your head tilted back, your heart pounding with dread. There is no anaesthetic. He might offer you a swig of strong ale or wine, but it does little to prepare you for what's to come. He inspects the tooth, prodding the tender area with a metal tool, causing you to cry out in pain. He declares that the tooth is rotten and must be pulled. He takes out his primary instrument, a terrifying-looking tool called a dental pelican, because its shape resembles the bird's beak. It's designed to hook under the tooth and lever it out. He tells you to hold still as he forces the tool into your mouth, grips the offending molar and pulls. The sound is a sickening crunch of breaking bone. The pain is white-hot, blinding and absolute. He twists and pulls again. The tooth, its roots long and firmly embedded in your jaw, refuses to come out cleanly. It shatters. He's forced to dig out the remaining fragments, one by one, from the bloody, mangled socket. Finally it's over. He packs the hole with a bit of cloth and sends you on your way, poorer and profoundly traumatised. A major historical fact is that for most of history, extraction was the only answer for a problematic tooth. The focus was not on saving the tooth, but on removing the source of pain. This is why skeletal remains from this period often show people with few or no molars left, and evidence of abscesses and severe dental wear is extremely common. But your ordeal isn't over. The extraction was clumsy, and the instruments were not sterile. A piece of the infected root may have been left behind, or bacteria from your mouth and the surgeon's tools have been pushed deep into the socket. A few days later, the socket, instead of healing, becomes a pit of fire. The pain is worse than before. Your jaw begins to swell, the side of your face becoming a tight, hot and grotesquely swollen mass. You have developed a dental abscess, a pocket of pus forming in the bone of your jaw. The infection is now sealed in, with nowhere to go. The pressure builds, creating an agony you could not have imagined. You can't eat, you can barely drink. A fever begins to rage, the same kind you had as a child with that lung infection. The infection is no longer a dental problem, it's a systemic crisis. The bacteria are seeping from the abscess into your bloodstream, just as they did from that splinter in your finger years ago. You are descending into sepsis, poisoned from the inside out by your own tooth. Historians still argue about the exact role dental infections played in overall mortality rates, as it's often difficult to determine from skeletal remains alone. But there is no doubt that before the age of antibiotics, a severe dental abscess was a common and frequently fatal condition. It was a ticking time bomb in your own head. You lie in your cottage, delirious with fever, your face swollen beyond recognition. Your family watches helplessly. The barber surgeon has no other cures to offer. He might suggest lancing the swelling from the outside of your cheek to try and drain the pus. Another agonizing procedure that would leave you permanently disfigured, but it's too little, too late. The poison is already in your blood. The world begins to fade into a fog of pain and fever. All of the dangers you have survived, the plague that killed your parents, the famine that nearly starved you, the soldier's sword, the boar's tusk seem like grand, epic threats. In the end, it may be the slow, silent decay of a single molar that finally brings you down. It's a mundane, undignified, and agonizing end. A testament to the fact that in your world, even the smallest parts of your body can betray you in the most catastrophic way. Your life is hanging by a thread, your body racked with fever from the raging infection in your jaw. It seems like the end. But then, something gives. The abscess, under immense pressure, bursts. It drains foul-tasting pus into your mouth, a disgusting but life-saving release. The pressure subsides, and over the next few days your fever slowly breaks. You are left weak, disfigured with a permanently swollen jaw, and with a hole in your gum that will never fully heal. But you have, once again, cheated death. You are a testament to the sheer, stubborn resilience of the human body. You've survived by instinct, by luck, and by the roll of a genetic dice. But as you recover, you're surrounded by a world of beliefs and common sense knowledge that is not just wrong, but actively harmful. It's not the things you don't know that are the biggest threat now. It's the things that you, and everyone around you, know for a fact that simply are not true. What you don't know might hurt you, but what you think you know for certain can be just as lethal. You believe, for example, that the night air is dangerous. It's a concept known as miasma, the same idea that you encountered during the plague. Everyone knows that the cold, damp air of night is filled with noxious vapours and ill humours that cause disease. So, every evening, no matter how hot and stuffy the cottage is, you seal it up as tightly as possible. You shutter the windows and stuff rags in the cracks, breathing the same stale, smoky, carbon monoxide heavy air all night long. This environment is a paradise for airborne pathogens like tuberculosis. That persistent cough you hear from your neighbour isn't just a cough, it could be consumption, and by sealing yourselves in together every night, you are dramatically increasing your chances of contracting it. Your understanding of medicine is still rooted in the humoral theory. When your child develops a fever, your first thought isn't to hydrate them, but to worry about their excess of hot and moist humours. You might follow the doctor's advice and try to cool them by feeding them cold foods like cucumbers or melons, withholding the hearty, warm broths their body actually needs to fight the infection. You are, with the best intentions, actively weakening your sick child based on a flawed but universally accepted medical doctrine. Personal hygiene is another area where common sense leads you astray. Remember that bath you take once a month? Many people, including some physicians, believed that opening the pores of the skin with hot water was dangerous, as it allowed miasmas and disease to enter the body. Therefore, being dirty was seen by some as a protective layer, a shield of grime against the hostile world. It's a perfect example of a belief that not only encourages poor hygiene but gives it a medical justification. Then there is the world of folk remedies, a minefield of dangerous misinformation. We've touched on some of these before, like using cow dung on a wound, a fantastic way to introduce tetanus, or trying to smoke out a toothworm with a hallucinogen. The list is endless and terrifying. A common treatment for baldness involved rubbing a cream made of crushed onions and honey on your scalp. While harmless, it was also useless. But a treatment for cataracts involved a powder made from mixing crushed glass with honey and applying it directly to the eye. This cure would, of course, cause blindness and agonizing pain. A major historical fact is that the line between science, magic, and religion was incredibly blurry. A priest might write a prayer on a piece of parchment, which you would then be instructed to swallow as a cure for stomach pains. This holy medicine was considered perfectly legitimate. Astrological charts were consulted before any major undertaking, from planting a field to performing a surgery, as the positions of the planets were believed to have a direct and powerful influence on all earthly events. This wasn't fringe thinking, it was mainstream science. Historians still argue about how much real knowledge coexisted with this superstition. Did people, on some level, know that a poultice of clean moss, which has antiseptic properties, worked better than a dung poultice? They must have observed it. But the power of tradition and received wisdom from authority figures like priests and physicians was immense. To go against the established knowledge was to risk being seen as a fool, or worse, a heretic. There's a quirky and particularly telling belief about conception and childbirth. It was widely thought that a woman's imagination could affect the physical form of her child. If a pregnant woman were to be frightened by a rabbit, her child might be born with a hare lip. If she looked at a painting of a saint, her child might be born with a saintly disposition. This belief placed an enormous and stressful burden on women to control their thoughts and environment for 9 months, lest they mark their child with some monstrous deformity. You navigate this world of misinformation every day. You seal yourself in at night to avoid the poisonous air. You treat wounds with remedies that are more likely to cause infection than to cure it. You trust in a medical system that is based on a complete misunderstanding of the human body. You have survived so many external threats, but the flawed software running in your own head, the collective common sense of your era, is a constant invisible threat, guiding your decisions in ways that are often profoundly and fatally wrong. You've survived the burst abscess in your jaw, another scar to add to your collection, another story of improbable survival. You're in your 30s, a seasoned veteran of a life that has been a relentless series of battles. You fought hunger, disease, violence, and the flawed wisdom of your age. But now you face a different kind of enemy, one that doesn't attack your body with fever or claws, but erodes you from the inside out. It's the immense, crushing weight of it all. It is the weariness of the soul. Every single day, from the moment you wake to the moment you fall into an exhausted sleep, you are surrounded by death and the memory of death. You look at your wife and child, and your love for them is mingled with a constant gnawing anxiety. You know, with an intimacy that we can barely comprehend, how quickly they could be taken from you. You've seen it happen, over and over again. You saw it in the village during the plague, you saw it in your own family with the death of your parents, and you see it every time a neighbour's baby fails to survive its first winter. This isn't an abstract fear, it's a lived reality. You walk through a village that is still half empty, a landscape of ghosts. You pass the overgrown plot of land that belonged to Edith's family. You see the crumbling remains of cottages that will never be rebuilt. Every landmark is a memorial. The grief is not something you get over. It's a part of the soil, a constant presence you carry with you. The physical toll of your life has been immense. Your body is a roadmap of your hardships. Your back aches from years of stooping labour. Your joints are stiff and swollen with what we would call arthritis. Your hands are a mass of calluses and scars. The sun has weathered your face, carving deep lines into your skin. You're in your early 30s, but you look 50. Your body's old before its time, worn down by a lifetime of toil and malnutrition. But the psychological toll is just as profound. You live in a state of perpetual low-grade anxiety. You worry about the weather. Will there be a drought? A flood? You worry about the harvest. Will it be enough? You worry about the Lord's agent. Will he raise the rent? You worry about sickness, about bandits, about fire. Your mind has never known true peace, true security. It is always on alert, always scanning for the next threat. This constant stress, this flood of cortisol and adrenaline, wears you down as surely as any physical labour. A major historical fact is that melancholy, what we might now call depression, was a recognised condition in the Middle Ages. According to the humoral theory you live by, it was caused by an excess of black bile, leading to sadness, lethargy, and despair. The treatments were, of course, based on this flawed premise: purges, special diets, and bloodletting to try and rebalance the humours. But the recognition of the condition itself shows that your ancestors understood that the mind could be as sick as the body. You find solace where you can. The Church offers a powerful narrative, a promise that your suffering on this earth is temporary and that a better world awaits. The rituals, the music, the familiar cadence of the Latin Mass provide a sense of order and meaning in a chaotic world. It's a comfort, but it is also a reminder of the sin and damnation that could lead you to an eternity of torment. The fear of hell is as real to you as the fear of starvation. The tavern offers a more immediate, if fleeting, escape. After a long week of work, an evening spent with a jug of ale, sharing stories and complaints with your fellow villagers, can be a vital release. The laughter and companionship are a balm. But for some, this escape becomes a trap, a slide into alcoholism that only deepens their poverty and despair. Historians still argue about the emotional landscape of the medieval peasant. Were they so inured to hardship and death that they became stoic and unfeeling? Or were they, beneath a hardened exterior, just as emotionally vulnerable as we are today? The art and literature of the time filled with tragic love stories, mournful laments, and a profound sense of the fragility of life. Ubisoft poetry, which asks, "Where are they now?" was a popular genre, suggests the latter. The human capacity for love, grief and despair hasn't changed. There's a quirky and poignant aspect of this psychological burden, the fear of a bad death. A good death was one where you died in your own bed, surrounded by family, having received the last rites from a priest to cleanse your soul for its journey. A bad death was to die suddenly, alone and unshriven, killed by a bandit on the road, struck by lightning, or drowned in a river. This wasn't just a fear of dying, it was a deep theological terror that your soul would be in jeopardy. This is why people formed guilds and fraternities that, among other things, promised to pray for the souls of members who met an untimely end. It was a form of spiritual insurance against the randomness of fate. Some days the weight is too much. You sit at your table staring at the wall, the energy to move or speak gone from you. The endless repetitive cycle of struggle seems pointless. You have fought so hard for so long, and for what? To face another season of back-breaking work, another winter of cold and hunger, another wave of sickness? The sheer grinding hopelessness of it all can threaten to extinguish the spark of will that has kept you alive this long. This is the hidden killer of your age. It's not a bacterium or a virus. It's despair. It's the slow erosion of the spirit under a constant barrage of hardship. Many of your peers who survived the physical threats may have succumbed to this, losing the will to fight, letting go, and quietly fading away. Your final and perhaps greatest battle is not against the world, but against the darkness within yourself. But you don't succumb to the darkness. That same stubborn grit that saw you through fever and famine now serves you in this internal battle. You find reasons to keep going. The smile of your child, the warmth of your wife's hand, the simple satisfaction of a straight furrow ploughed in the spring soil. You push through the weariness, you endure the anxiety, and one day you wake up and realise a startling fact. You have just turned 30. In our world, this is a fairly unremarkable milestone, often met with a mixture of celebration and light-hearted jokes about being over the hill. In your world, it is a colossal achievement. You have survived to an age that a huge portion of the people you were born with never reached. You are a statistical marvel, a walking, breathing testament to a life that has, against all odds, refused to be extinguished. Let's pause and take stock of why this is so remarkable. We need to understand the demographic reality you inhabit. The oft-quoted statistic that the average life expectancy in the Middle Ages was around 30 to 35 is one of the most misunderstood figures in history. This number is not a prediction of how long a typical adult would live. It's a statistical average that is massively skewed downward by the horrifying rates of infant and child mortality. Remember your grand entrance. 1 in 4 of your fellow newborns didn't make it to their first birthday. Of those who survived that first year, another significant portion died before reaching adulthood from disease, accidents, or malnutrition. These early deaths drag the average life expectancy down dramatically. A major historical fact is that if you, a medieval person, successfully survived to the age of 20, your statistical life expectancy shot up significantly. You were no longer expected to die at 30. You now had a decent chance of living into your 50s or even 60s. You have beaten the Reaper's average not by reaching 30, but by surviving childhood. 30 isn't the finish line. It's the start of true adulthood for the lucky few. So look around you at the other survivors, the other people in their 30s and 40s. You are a select group. You are the hardy ones, the lucky ones. You all carry the scars, physical and emotional, of the gauntlet you've passed through. You are the graduates of the world's harshest school. Let's tally your personal victories. You survived a perilous birth in a dirt-floored hut. You endured childhood diseases like measles or whooping cough without the aid of vaccines. You navigated a toddlerhood full of open fires and wells. You grew up on a diet that was often inadequate and sometimes poisonous. You lived in a filth-soaked environment that was a breeding ground for pathogens. You were cured by a medical system that relied on bloodletting and superstition. You survived the constant threat of infection from a simple scratch. You began a life of hard labour at age 7. Your wife survived the mortal danger of childbirth. You avoided being maimed or executed by a brutal justice system. You lived through a famine that starved your neighbours. You escaped a fire that consumed your home. You survived the dangers of the open road. You endured the oppression of a feudal lord. You weren't killed in a petty war between nobles. You lived through the single greatest demographic catastrophe in human history, the Black Death. You weren't burned as a heretic or a witch. You haven't succumbed to the wolves, the boars, or a rabid dog. You survived a septic dental abscess. You haven't been killed by the bad advice that passes for common sense. And you have not let the crushing despair of it all extinguish your spirit. Take a breath. It's an impressive list. Historians still argue about the concept of age itself in the Middle Ages. For most peasants like you, precise birthdays weren't a major concern. People tracked their age by referring to major events. I was a boy when the Great Famine happened, or I was newly married just before the pestilence. Your sense of your own age is less a number, and more a collection of experiences and a measure of your physical ability to work. You are old when you can no longer pull your weight in the fields. There's a quirky detail that illustrates this different perception of aging. In medieval art, people are often depicted as either very young or as old and wizened. The visual representation of a middle-aged person is less common. Society was often divided not into neat chronological decades but into broader ages of man, such as infancy, childhood, adolescence, youth, maturity, and old age, senectitude. By reaching 30, you have firmly entered the age of maturity. You are now considered an elder of your community, a man whose advice is sought and whose opinion carries weight. You look at your own body. It's tired, it's scarred, but it's still functional. You look at your family, a wife who has shared every hardship, a child who represents a future you fought so hard to secure. You have a roof over your head, a new one that you built yourself. You have food in the larder, and you have a status in your community that your serf father could only have dreamed of. You have, by the standards of your time, won. But you know it's a temporary victory. The world is still a dangerous place. The threats have not vanished. They are merely waiting. You are more resilient now, more knowledgeable, but you are also older. Your body doesn't bounce back from illness or injury the way it used to. You're entering a new phase of life, one where the dangers may be less dramatic, but no less final. You have beaten the average. Now you have to see how long you can outrun the inevitable. You have made it. You are a man in your late 30s, a pillar of your small recovering community. You have outlived the statistical average, outlasted the plague, outwitted famine. The ghosts of the past are still there, but they are quieter now. Your life is one of hard, unceasing labour, but it has a rhythm you have come to rely on. You have known love, loss, and the simple, profound joy of watching your own child grow into a young adult, strong and healthy. By all measures of your time, you are a success story. But the body keeps a careful tally of every hardship, and the bill is coming due. It doesn't start with a dramatic event. There is no sudden sickness, no violent injury. It begins with a cough, a persistent nagging cough that you pick up in the autumn and that, for the first time in your life, doesn't go away when winter ends. You feel a weariness that seeps deeper than the exhaustion from a long day's work. You find yourself losing your appetite. The coarse bread and salty bacon that have sustained you for a lifetime now taste like ash. Your wife looks at you with worried eyes as you start to lose weight, the muscle you earned through decades of labour slowly wasting away. Your friends in the village tell you to rest, but you know that to stop working is to die. You push yourself, heading out to the fields each morning, but the work is harder now. You have to pause for breath more often. The strength in your arms and back feels like it's being siphoned away day by day. This isn't a battle, it's a slow, managed retreat. The local healer gives you herbal infusions that do nothing. The priest says prayers for your strength. But everyone can see what is happening. You are fading. By the time the next winter sets in, you are too weak to work. You spend your days by the fire wrapped in blankets, while your son, now a capable young man, takes your place in the fields. It is a painful changing of the guard. You have become what you always feared, a mouth to feed that cannot contribute. The cough deepens, settling in your chest, and your breathing becomes a shallow rattling affair. As you lie on your straw mattress, you're keenly aware that your final duty is approaching, the duty of dying well. A major historical fact of your era is the concept of the ars moriendi, or the art of dying. Popular books and pamphlets circulated among the literate, detailing the proper way to face death, to confess your sins, affirm your faith, forgive your enemies, and accept your end with piety and courage, all while resisting the 5 temptations of the devil, like despair and pride. This was the ideal, the good death. You know the basics from the priest's sermons. You call your family to your bedside. You give your son your blessing and entrust your wife to his care. You speak your apologies and your affections. You have lived a hard life, but you have tried to be a good man. You are preparing your soul for its final journey. Historians still argue whether the formal ars moriendi literature, with its complex theological temptations, had any real impact on the deathbed practices of the common peasantry, or if your final hours were guided by a simpler, more personal faith and older folk traditions. As you lie there, feverish and weak, the line is indeed blurry. Your wife prays the Ave Maria, but she also quietly hangs a pouch of protective herbs over the bed, just in case. In this moment of ultimate crisis, a strange and quirky folk practice might be considered. In some remote areas, a sin-eater could be summoned. This was a destitute person who, for a small fee, would ritually eat a meal, a crust of bread, a bowl of ale, over your body, and in doing so was believed to absorb the sins of your soul, taking them onto themselves and allowing you to die in a state of grace. It was a practice condemned by the church, but born of a desperate need for final, tangible assurance. Your family doesn't call one. They put their trust in the priest, who comes to hear your final confession and anoint you with holy oil. The world shrinks to the confines of the small, smoky room. The faces of your wife and son swim in and out of focus. The pain in your chest is a dull, heavy weight. You have faced down so many grand and terrible foes. You fought the plague, a beast that devoured half of Europe. You survived the Baron's raid, a flash of steel and fire. You wrestled a living from the stubborn earth through famine and flood. You thought, if anything were to claim you, it would be something equally epic. But in the end, it's not the dragon that gets you. It's the draft under the door. It's the lifetime of breathing smoky air. It's the accumulated damage from years of malnutrition and relentless toil. Your final enemy is simply a worn-out body, a pair of tired lungs that can no longer draw a full breath. Your end is quiet, undignified, and painfully mundane. It is not a bang, but a slow, weary exhalation. Your last breath mingles with the wood smoke in the air, and then there is only silence. And so the flame of your small, tenacious life, which flickered so bravely through the storm of this medieval world, is finally, gently extinguished. You have made it to 38. You have won. The story of that life, a life of struggle and small triumphs, now fades into the gentle quiet of your own room. The world of the past, with all its sharp edges and its cold, hard ground, can now recede, becoming a distant echo, a whisper in the long corridor of history. Your journey tonight is ending very differently from the one we just witnessed. You're not in a smoky cottage, listening to the wind howl outside. You're safe and you're comfortable, surrounded by a peace and a quiet that our weary traveller could only have dreamed of. There is no fever to break, no famine to fear, no sudden alarm in the night. There is only the soft weight of your own blankets and the steady rhythmic sound of your own breathing. Let the story of that distant past dissolve, leaving behind only a sense of stillness. Let the soft background hum of the fan, or the quiet of your room, be the only sound that remains. It is time to let go of the day, to let the muscles in your body grow heavy and loose, and to allow your mind to drift on the gentle tide that pulls you toward a deep and restorative sleep.